The hand lay motionless on the floor in the illuminated room. The boy raised his head to look out the window. He was interested in the singing of birds. Then he turned to the right and saw his reflection, not quite realizing it all. Taking a closer look, the guy wanted to understand who it was in the reflection. Touching his face with his hand, he said that he looked really shitty right now. Having decided to check what had happened to him, he stood in front of the magical object. What he saw there made him scream at the top of his lungs. The boy turned into a goblin. Fantasy Frontier is a highly rated and popular game, loved for its stunning graphics and intricate storyline. It was precisely because this game went viral due to its high ratings that the main character couldn't pass it by, and it completely absorbed him. Yesterday, the guy actually killed one goblin and increased his level. Now he sat in thought, because after he fell asleep, he became a goblin. The protagonist looked at his face in the mirror and discovered that he looked like a human, but his race was goblin. Suddenly a headache started. The hero sank to his knees and grabbed his head with his hands. His memories began to mix and merge. Looking through new pictures not from his past, the hero discovered that the guy whose body he took over did not live the sweetest life. He was pulled out of his thoughts by a girl who opened the door to his room and called him brother. In response to her request to get up faster, the main character replied that he still needed a couple of minutes. Running down the street, the girl carried a basket in her hands and sang a song about how she would cook the most delicious dinner for her brother today. Hearing this, the main character smiled and said that he was looking forward to it. As he passed the buildings, the hero realized that these streets were familiar to him. He had no doubt that he had entered the world of the Fantasy Frontier game. He analyzed the memories that came to him, and it turned out that he and his sister had lost their parents, and now they had to live under the protection of a black market merchant who used them as hired labor. Suddenly, the girl tripped and almost fell along with the basket, but her brother caught her in time. The sister happily thanked the hero for this, saying that everything was fine with her. Remembering that her name was Lily, the hero replied that her brother would always look after her. She kept smiling and said that since she was blind, all she could do was rely on him. The guy thought about his words, because even though he said he wanted to protect his sister, he was a goblin, the weakest race of all possible. Looking up at the clouds, he wondered why he had been cut down here, and what he should do now. The very same mansion of the black market merchant was already in sight of the two guys. After saying goodbye to her brother, Lily waved to him and said that she would see him later. The protagonist thought about Lily, his blind sister, for whom he joined the guild and now completed all the tasks alone. He was ordered to extract black ore, a rare and dangerous mineral. He nodded and accepted the task without showing his doubts. He worked hard, putting all his strength into pulling the heavy cart behind him. His scream echoed when the overseer noticed him and kicked the cart, causing the protagonist to fall. He started shouting, calling the hero green and demanding that he work faster. The tired protagonist stopped briefly to catch his breath. At that moment, the blonde-haired boy remembered the day he was accepted into the elite guild, and his friends were shocked. The protagonist remained sitting near his cart, listening to their conversations. The overseer mocked the protagonist, saying that he wouldn't even have time to eat if he worked so slowly. The dark-haired goblin cursed darkly to himself. He thought that reincarnation in a goblin's body was complete crap. He remembered the map from the mansion and realized that 125 years had passed since the main events of the game. His age corresponded to that of a human. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a strange sensation. He saw a group of people in shining armor and cursed loudly in surprise. They sank one by one slowly to the ground. I didn't immediately understand how they ended up here. Then his face lit up with understanding. He recognized them. This special group of people, those who were in the game, are the Holy Knights. One of the townspeople shouted that the guards would protect them and called on everyone to run. The goblin quietly whispered that they were in the depths of the continent. The protagonist observed the chaos on the city streets. One laughed loudly at the monsters. He shouted that this is how it should be when monsters challenge people. The hero quickly got his bearings and realized that he needed to escape immediately. He saw his sister Lily sitting in the corner, scared. The protagonist told her to go faster. Then the girl quietly called him brother as they ran. The hero pushed his way through the crowd, shouting for people to get out of the way. The guy helped his sister up and asked how she was. The knight mocked the boys who didn't manage to escape, calling them freaks. The goblin understood that he would not be able to defeat this powerful enemy, but he still decided to act and rushed into battle with a loud cry. The protagonist desperately shouted at Lily to run right now. The young man looked at the approaching knight, when he himself was already falling from his blow. The boy thought about what happened after he was reborn in this world. He reflected with bitterness that to die so absurdly was a terrible end. Suddenly a female figure appeared, glowing blue. A screen with files and numbers appeared in front of him. It contained information that could be found at great speed. The protagonist realized with horror that if he died, his family would die, and Lily would definitely not survive. He thought about his life, when his condition was in a borderline state. Then a voice was heard, informing that time was running out and everyone had to be finished off. The protagonist opened his eyelids in amazement. The girl was in danger of not surviving. The unpleasant man kept shouting at her, expressing his opinion that she should die. The main character walked slowly behind him, ordering him to stop. The knights looked at the goblin in amazement, wondering if he was still alive. The protagonist darkly whispered that he had to kill them all. The goblin suddenly activated a dark magic called Demonic Leap. The young man felt his body being filled with incredible strength. The guy attacked his opponents furiously. The protagonist moved with inhuman speed, leaving behind only blurry silhouettes. The hero looked with fury at the knight who raised his sword against his sister, while holding a weapon in his own hands. The young man asked menacingly if he dared to raise a weapon against Lily. The protagonist struck, leaving no chance to respond, demonstrating the full power of his new strength. The protagonist was determined to protect his sister at any cost. The city looked like ruins after all these events. It has already been announced that the invaders have already left the city. Everyone was happy thinking that they had dealt with the threat, while people were shouting that this couldn't be happening and that someone had seen a demon in a cloak who had dealt with people. Lily sat to the side with her brother. The protagonist received a notification about the completion of the task, awakening the first level. He felt pain and tried his best not to scream. Lily asked her brother if it hurt. The protagonist replied that everything was fine, although it was not so. He realized that over time he would receive new powers in exactly this way. Meanwhile, Butch saw his father, glad that he was okay. He confessed that he was the demon in the cloak who dealt with the people. Butch boasted that he dealt with all the invaders. He said that it was not in vain that he trained his magic and entered the Magic Academy. The protagonist watched and listened to these vile conversations. While the crowd admired him and said he was incredible, she thanked Butch, saying that thanks to him, they would all be saved. Butch modestly replied that he was not worth the gratitude. He stated that it was his duty to protect the city's residents. Meanwhile, the protagonist watched this scene with irony. He thought Butch was just looking for easy money and fame. While Lily and the protagonist were talking about how they didn't have the money to see magic, Butch said that they were stubborn and had a great will to live. The protagonist looked at him gloomily and said only one word: listen. The main character asked Butch why he was lying, since it wasn't he who defeated the people. The guy invited Butch to prove his strength in battle. The protagonist said that if he wins, Butch must confess to everything. Butch looked stunned by such a proposal. Then he asked with a sly smile what would happen if he won. The fair-haired boy demonstrated his dark magic, showing how he overpowered people. He looked at the main character standing in front of him with a satisfied look. But suddenly darkness began to thicken above his head. He looked in amazement at the forces of dark magic, which looked very terrifying. The protagonist confidently asked if he really had defeated an entire squad on his own. Butch tried to claim that he wasn't lying, but the protagonist threatened that he would pay with his life for lying. The main character did all this. He wanted to make the guy confess. The protagonist used dark illusion magic, which causes hallucinations to appear on the enemy when they meet his gaze. Butch was under the spell and couldn't understand what was happening. The protagonist approached Lily and calmly said that they could go. Butch tried to stop them, to find out what it was. The main character decided not to react to it in any way. As he left with his sister, he was glad that although he had not been reborn as the strongest goblin, he had been able to become the strongest before his death. The guy thought that now he would be able to protect himself and his sister. He was sure that he could cope with any squad of people if it was necessary to protect Lily. The brother and sister sat and rested on the steps of a crumbling building. Lily noticed that her brother was acting strangely, and assumed that he was tired of all the events. Suddenly, the protagonist asked his sister to turn her head. He gently touched her face with his hand. The protagonist decided to try using dark healing magic on Lily. He knew she had been blind since birth, but high-level magic could be tried. Now it seems that something has changed in the girl's mind. The girl began to open her eyes in amazement. Opening them completely, she began to ask with a cry, not believing herself, if she really could see. The protagonist was pleased with his work, but especially with the fact that Lily was so happy. The protagonist explained that much had changed during the human attack, and that he now knew how to use dark magic. Lily couldn't believe what was happening and asked how this was even possible. The boy began to think that perhaps he had always been talented, but his abilities only manifested themselves in a critical situation. The girl couldn't believe that it could all happen so easily. The protagonist modestly replied that, however, he was glad that his sister could now see him. Lily cried out with tears in her eyes that her brother was able to heal her, and that he was simply incredible. Already choking on tears of happiness, Lily clung to her brother's chest, not knowing how else to thank him. Suddenly a strange bright glow appeared behind them, which surprised both of them. A little goblin fairy appeared. She introduced herself and said that she was tasked with leading them to a hidden goblin village. The brother and sister were still wary of her. The fairy added that she was very glad to meet the invincible goblin. It was clear from her expression that she was very interested in this character. The main character asked in surprise what this hidden village was. Now the fairy was already leading her companions across the magical continent, an uninhabited area. As they walked, the guy tried to comprehend everything that was happening. The protagonist reflected that he didn't know about the existence of the goblin village, since it wasn't mentioned in the game either. The goblin fairy flew alongside with a smile on her face and seemed to be unconcerned about anything. A group of 3 people were already standing at the entrance to the hidden village. The protagonist remembered that in the game, Fantasy Frontier, one could meet many unusual races. The fairy explained that a concealment spell had been cast on the village, so he didn't know about it. The protagonist nodded, finally understanding the situation. The fairy settled comfortably on top of Lily's head. She offered to take the main character to the village elder. The guy walked and looked at those around him, while they looked at him in return. Lily was immediately surrounded by local goblins. When the children joyfully asked the girl to play with them, she wondered if it was possible. The fairy said that Lily did not have to attend the meeting with the headman. The protagonist nodded and allowed his sister to go play with the children. Lily was very pleased with this outcome of events. The hero thought that Lily had only recently regained her sight and must want to have some fun. The village elder sat opposite the boy, and after his story, he expressed surprise that there were still goblins outside the village. He remembered the prophecy that said that one day a young man would come to the village with a goblin fairy. The headman explained that, according to legend, he was obliged to give the young man their hidden treasure. The protagonist finally realized whose voice he heard at his death. It was the voice of a prophet. The headman rose from his chair and decided to go somewhere. He asked to wait a second while he brought the treasure. The protagonist observed life in the village and thought that its inhabitants, living far from civilization, were doomed to be left without vital resources. The fairy bitterly noted that the fate of the goblins was not to be envied, since all monsters despised them. For people, goblins were like bugs, incapable of fighting back. People called it natural selection, but the fairy called it complete nonsense. The protagonist mentally agreed with her, without saying anything out loud. A little later I remembered that in the game the goblins were indeed the weakest enemy for the player. He realized with bitter irony that he would never have thought that he would find himself in their shoes. But that's how it all turned out. Fate decided everything itself. The headman returned and handed the main character an ancient object. The guy began to examine it at first with misunderstanding. But when he realized it, he opened his eyes wide in amazement and could not believe that he was seeing it. The hero exclaimed that this was the same artifact that he remembered from the game. The elder sadly explained that the life of their race was too fragile. Due to exile and persecution, their existence will soon come to an end. He added that if they had a strong leader, they could have survived. The boy looked at the headman with sympathy, understanding the gravity of the goblin's situation. Suddenly they heard a noise outside. A second later, the little goblins were already standing next to the hero and did not dare to say anything. But suddenly they decided, folded their hands in supplication, and began to ask the main character in one voice. The protagonist looked at the goblins who had just entered his village. They, too, were desperately asking him to save their village. They reminded him that he was the young man of prophecy and their last hope. The headman and other residents even fell on their knees before him. If only he would agree to save them from certain death. The main character, going outside, sat down with his sister to think about what had happened. I remembered that although individual goblins were weak, in a group they could create problems, and some had special powers. The goblins were facing complete extinction. The boy thought that the human race had begun to actively conquer the continent, displacing other races. Lily asked why this happened, why the strong always suppress the weak. But there was no answer. The main character thought about what he should do now in this difficult situation. The goblin fairy suggested that he first check what abilities he had managed to unlock after recent events. The guy realized that, although he was improving his skills by completing tasks, they were at fairly low levels. He suggested that his system lacked a skill tree, making it difficult to assess his strength. However, in addition to his many skills, his status also increased, which gave some hope. The protagonist decided that before deciding to help the goblins, he needed to first test his strength to understand what he was truly capable of. In order to accomplish this, he thought of activating the dark magic Hellfire. For a while nothing happened. The hero gathered his courage. A moment later, the main character was already in the same place. He felt the energy flowing through his body, giving him a sense of control and power. Powerful streams of black fire erupted from his hands, destroying everything in their path. He could even cut through a huge, massive wall if it were in his way. Those watching from the sidelines were amazed by his magic and power. He continued testing his abilities, feeling his magical power grow with each passing moment. 2 girls were knocked off their feet by such a powerful flow of energy from the main character. He left behind only clouds of smoke and dust, leaving no chance of defeat. The guy assessed the power of the spell with satisfaction, and said that it was not bad. The girls completely agreed with him. The protagonist realized that now that everything was in order, he could use spells effectively. Now he was ready to make the decision to help the goblins, knowing that he had enough power to protect them. The scroll that the village elder gave the hero contained a map indicating a specific location in the hidden village. The protagonist approached the memorial, which was built in memory of the goblin heroes. He realized that it was in this place that he had to cast the most important spell. Here, on the magical continent, in the hidden village of goblins, he made up his mind. The boy began the summoning ritual, and powerful creatures began to appear before him. There were countless numbers of them, apparently many times larger and stronger than the main character. A hobgoblin is a creature larger and stronger than a normal goblin. A dragon goblin is a hybrid of a dragon and a goblin with wings and scales. A goblin priestess with magical powers and wisdom. Goblin general, experienced military leader and strategist. The fairy watched with satisfaction as they appeared one after another, saying to herself, "They have finally arrived." At that moment, the hero thought that even goblins give birth to special individuals once every 1,000 years who are capable of changing the fate of the entire race. Taking a step forward, the protagonist explained that even goblins give birth to individuals with incredible abilities. These mutants among the ordinary goblins possessed heroic souls, which were now brought to life by his magic. Despite the impressive size of the powerful creatures, the boy was confident that they would all do what he said. The summoned creatures bowed their heads in respect and said that they heeded his words. They recognized in the main hero the one who would bring peace to the goblin race. The dark-haired boy felt a strong connection being established between him and the powers. Now he had an army capable of protecting the village and changing the fate of the entire goblin race. Someone kept trying to wake up the guy who was in a dream, calling him the Chosen One. He only succeeded when I shouted at him at the top of my voice that he was an idiot and that he urgently needed to wake up. Or rather, she succeeded. A beautiful woman with 2 horns appeared in front of the main character. After a moment's hesitation, she introduced herself as the Goblin Goddess. The boy looked at her in amazement, not immediately believing that goblins had their own deity. He remembered seeing a fresco in the headman's house depicting a woman with 2 horns. The protagonist thought that, at first glance, she looked more like a seductive succubus than a goddess. The goddess rudely ordered him to stand up, calling him an idiot again. She explained that on the day they met, she had little time to properly clarify the whole situation. Now she promised to tell him why everything happened exactly this way, why she decided to reward the main hero with a part of the divine power. She said that after completing the game, one could countless goblins who died miserable deaths. After all, they are the weakest race of all on the continent. The protagonist asked doubtfully how they could go from being the weakest to the strongest. The goddess replied that even they could become the strongest thanks to the legacy of their ancestors. She revealed the secret of the goblins' strength. Hundreds of the weakest united into a single whole, becoming the strongest. They all want to protect what is dear to them, and the main character's younger sister is also dear to them. In the future, their race faces inevitable demise, and only the protagonist can change this. After these words, the main character woke up in his bed with alarm. At this time, the sun was already high outside the window, breaking through the glass into the guy's room. He sat up, remembering what exactly had happened in his dream. The goddess's words came to his mind on their own. He realized that he needed to take matters into his own hands. The hero took a pen from the inkwell, sat down at the desk and began to write words on a sheet of paper. Sitting next to and watching the main character, the fairy asked if he was sure of his decision. The guy explained that there was nothing to worry about. He had already thought everything through. He wanted to create a world where all the villagers and his sister would live in harmony and prosperity. And to do this, she needed to defeat one of the kings of the demon army that ruled this territory, namely, King Dire. Currently, Deer lives on the territory of the Magic Academy that he himself founded. If the hero succeeds in becoming an outstanding student at the academy, he will be able to meet the founder in person. And at that very moment, the guy had a plan to kill him. The hero patted his sister on the head and said that she would have to stay here. He had to leave her so as not to expose her to danger. Lily asked her brother for only one thing, to be careful on this dangerous journey. The protagonist announced that he was heading to the academy to take the entrance exam, and he asked the fairy what she would do. The fairy replied that looking after him was much more interesting. The hero walked through the magical continent, the territory of King Deer, and the nearby city. The protagonist determined which direction the academy was located and set off on his journey. On the way, he witnessed a scene where a man was rudely shouting at his slave that because of her, he was late for the convention. The slave girl asked for forgiveness in fear. Well, it seems the man didn't care about her apologies and started kicking her, saying that he had had enough of these words. The protagonist thought that it was an unenviable life for those who served such a master, who always got angry when his slaves didn't behave perfectly. The fairy said that this bastard is a low-ranking demon himself, but he boasts about the weaker ones. The protagonist remembered that in the game there was a character named Bradley, a lowly demon nobleman who made his fortune in the slave trade. The guy thought with indignation that he really wanted to give him a good beating for such behavior. The hero decided to use the dark magic of goblin kinship to summon helpers. He began to cast a spell, following the light from this impenetrable darkness, to come to its call and fulfill the order. His eyes began to glow a bright purple, and from his lips came the one he wanted to summon, the goblin priestess. His hand, without touching the surface, drew magical symbols. From these symbols a wave of energy arose, beating at high speed. A female figure began to emerge from the darkness. As time went on, the darkness became less and less, and the girl could already be seen in full height. She opened her eye, glowing a beautiful blue color, looking at the one who summoned her. While warming up after this journey, the priestess said that she had not visited this world for a very long time. Raising her palm upwards, greeting the heroes, she asked why she had been summoned. The fairy thought that the priestess was acting too frivolously for a heroic spirit. Apologizing for getting straight to the point, the guy asked the goblin priestess for a favor. Meanwhile, Bradley continued to humiliate the slave, saying that he got her for cheap. He kicked her to the ground, adding how useless she was. The crowd of people whispered and condemned the man, but no one dared to intervene. Only the main character made his way through the crowd and called out to Bradley. He approached the demon and demanded that he give him the girl. Bradley indignantly asked who he was and why he would give up the property he had bought. A conflict began between the protagonist and the lower demon nobleman. The protagonist offered to buy the girl from Bradley. The guy confirmed his intention and asked to name the price. The demon asked him in amazement if he really wanted to possess such a useless slave. He couldn't believe the seriousness of the guy's words. When Bradley said the girl was worth a maximum of 30 gold, the protagonist offered to pay 30 times more. The protagonist gave Bradley a whole bag of gold, which was given to him by the goblin priestess. The demon couldn't believe his luck and asked again if the boy was sure about such a generous offer. They literally threw bags at this man, leaving him standing in amazement. The protagonist finally asked again whether they had agreed on this deal. The satisfied demon took the money, thus confirming that they had reached an agreement, and the deal was completed. So he left, leaving the girl with the guy. The freed girl asked the protagonist why he saved her. The dark-haired guy replied that he was a goblin just like her, which is why he saved her. He promised that now no one would offend her. The girl looked at her savior with great gratitude and hope. The hero explained that he knew about Bradley's safe from the time of the game. Now, all that's left to do is get your own money from Bradley's safe using your stealth and ghost skills. The goblin priestess possessed these skills and readily agreed to this adventure. He added that they belonged to him anyway, and that deceiving such bad people wasn't so bad. The protagonist said that they could not allow the slave trade to flourish in their new world, and the girl listened to him attentively. The priestess happily agreed, saying that the master was such a flatterer, because he said that only she could handle it. He helped the girl up, asking if she could stand up. The girl thanked him and accepted his help, calling him sir. The main character asked the fairy to take this little girl to a safe place. The boy was left standing alone, looking at the clear sky. Now he had to go to the entrance exam at the Magic Academy. He was already very close to this academy and stopped to collect his thoughts. He whispered to himself that from now on, a new history would be written. The protagonist approached the main gate of the Magic Academy on the territory of King Deer. He thought that if he became the best student in the academy, he would be able to meet its director, King Deer. The guy was sure that despite his race, they simply could not ignore his abilities. He knew that anyone could take the exam, and if you had the ability, you would be accepted for training without question. The hero decided that he would then overthrow one of the 7 kings of the demon army with his own hands. The monitor announced that the students going to the entrance ceremony should line up. The line was huge. Everyone in it was talking nervously, perhaps discussing the approaching exam. The hero thought that he was ready for new challenges, knowing that a new story would be written here. While the main character was standing in line, someone touched him with a finger. It was a pretty girl who just stood there for a while and looked at the guy. She then nervously asked if he had any food with him. The guy began to check his pockets, looking for something that could satisfy the girl's request. The main character took out some chocolate from the bag that his little sister had put in for him. The girl, without waiting for the guy to offer her a treat, snatched it from his hands herself. I started eating it with appetite and pleasure, a smile shining on my face. The main character looked at her in surprise, not understanding what was happening. The blonde girl explained that when she was nervous, her magic went out of control, and food helped her calm down. Here, for example, is this chocolate for which the girl thanked the guy. But the hero did not notice the words of gratitude. He was angry that she ate his chocolate. The girl felt incredibly awkward, and realized that she had eaten something she shouldn't have. She apologized, saying she didn't know the chocolate was made by someone close to him. The main character explained that this chocolate was made for him by his sister, whom he had taken care of since childhood, and then he told his whole story. Thus began an unexpected acquaintance that could influence further events at the academy. The girl introduced herself as Letty. When asked to introduce himself to the main character, he admitted that he had no name. He thought to himself that for some reason he had no memory of his name at all, even after reincarnation. Letty enthusiastically offered to come up with a name for him themselves, saying that the boy had such bright green eyes, similar to the color of lime. So she suggested the name Lime, which suited the main character well. The guy was initially stunned by the rapidly developing events, but he still agreed to this name. He liked it. The announcement called on all students to gather for exams. The protagonist, now named Lime, and Letty heard the announcement. Letty asked to hurry to the central square of the Magic Academy, where the entrance examinations were to take place. When they arrived, one of the students remarked with disdain that this was the same shit goblin slave, pointing at Lime. Meanwhile, all applicants had already gathered in the central square. The examiner announced the next person, and the process of entrance examinations began, which would determine Lime's future at the academy. Some were still preparing, while the results of those who had already performed were being recorded. Suddenly, a new figure caught everyone's attention. With a cry of delight, someone announced that the rumors were not lying, it was all true. The princess of the Dark Elves herself arrived to enroll at the academy. Lime was surprised to learn that the Dark Elf princess was Letty, the girl who had previously been Butch's servant. He couldn't believe that she looked nothing like the princess he imagined. Lime wondered if he should speak to her more formally now that he knew her status. But he still simply praised her, saying that if she continued to train in the same spirit, she would easily pass the exam. Suddenly, a vampire named Haig approached him and said with contempt that the guy was a complete nobody. The boy and the girl looked in his direction with a surprised expression. Lime replied that he remembered the vampire as Butch's servant. Haig mockingly asked him what he was doing at the academy, and whether he really thought he could pass the entrance exam. Letty confidently answered for the guy that he came to take the exam, and so what? Lime wondered how Letty knew about his powers, since she had never even seen him in battle. Haig noted with a sneer that Letty was really going out of her way to protect this simpleton. She was so angry at the vampire for such words that it seemed like she might boil over. Letty continued to give Lime her enthusiastic support, saying she was rooting for him and urging him to show them his strongest spell. The hero thought that if it got more serious, he would simply smash this square to pieces. Lime thought, looking at the sight, because he wanted to test his strength to the maximum. Then he moved his gaze to his hand. He knew he had to restrain himself so as not to arouse suspicion in those around him. The examiner called the next candidate, and Lime prepared to demonstrate his abilities. He extended only one finger forward, directing a little of his energy towards the target. But even this did not help to concentrate only a small part of his magic. His wave of energy swept away both examiners and applicants. And although the protagonist tried to restrain himself, a huge crater remained at the site of his exam. Lime already realized that he had overdone it at this stage of the exam. Everyone, including the vampire Haig, who couldn't stand on the ground after Lime's performance, looked ahead in amazement. Lime admitted to Letty that he had overdone it a bit on the practical test, but still passed it. After the written test, the students had a break. Letty admitted that tests have always been a real torture for her, and they were just being carried out during the entrance exams, which is why she is worried. Lime stated with confidence that he had no doubt that he had answered all the questions correctly. He looked with absolute indifference at the vampire who had just approached. He wanted to prove that the guy had deceived the examiners. Lime noted that Haig apparently has a lot of free time to think about others and not about himself. Apparently he is so confident that he passed the exam. Haig had already grabbed his weapon. He wanted to answer for such words directed at him, but suddenly they announced that combat trials would soon take place. Then he turned away from the boys, saying that this time the main character was lucky. The vampire said with disdain that Lime should know his place as a member of the household. The hero decided not to react to this in any way, because he was confident in his abilities. When everyone had gathered before the start of the combat trials, the examiner announced that he would now explain how they would be conducted. He explained that while previously students demonstrated their skills in sparring against each other, now everyone would fight against the same target. The students sighed in surprise. They couldn't understand how it was possible to fight against one opponent. Lime realized that the director of the academy really decided to test their strength. According to the director, only the worthy can stand against one powerful opponent. The huge gates to the arena, where a crowd of students stood, began to open. Then the monster's terrifying yellow eyes, gleaming with anger, appeared. A huge monster entered the arena, which turned out to be a thunder dragon. Lime was surprised to recognize this powerful enemy, who only appeared late in the game and did not inhabit this region. He couldn't believe that this monster was their opponent in the entrance exams. The thunder dragon let out a deafening roar, startling many of the applicants, and stood up, looking at them all. Now the protagonist had to fight a creature that he remembered as the boss from the final levels of the game. Many applicants panicked, shouting that they could not cope with such a powerful opponent. The monster began to attack immediately, without understanding who was in front of him or where to direct his magic. The students ran in all directions, looking behind them to make sure this enemy didn't chase them. Meanwhile, everything around exploded from the creature's blows. Some, however, did not manage to avoid his attacks and were defeated, lying down, groaning and pleading for help. Even the vampire looked at this picture with fear, not knowing what to do. Letty, the princess of the Dark Elves, declared with determination that she must pass this exam at any cost. She rushed forward closer to the monster, while the others headed in the opposite direction. The girl said that she was doing this for her entire kingdom. She decided to activate a powerful spell, Wind Bonds, to restrain the thunder dragon. It seemed that she had succeeded in accomplishing her plan. The dragon was immobilized. Letty continued her attack by casting a wind arrow spell against the thunder dragon. However, the monster proved too strong and counterattacked, throwing back the dark elf princess. He roared at the top of his voice, demonstrating his power and superiority. The girl narrowed her eyes at the sound and the processes taking place in the arena. Sitting on the ground, she simply waited for rescue, while tears flowed from her eyes. Lime rushed to her to help in this difficult struggle. When he attacked the monster, he found that its defense was not so easy to penetrate. The situation was becoming increasingly dangerous for applicants, and not only for themselves. The guy asked the girl how she felt after such a powerful blow. Letty struggled to her feet, realizing that they couldn't handle such an enemy alone. The girl tried to use her abilities, but her magic was not yet controlled enough for such a serious fight. The dragon was about to break through the defense that the protagonist was trying to hold back. But while this was not working out, the enemy took off into the night sky. Lime watched what was happening with cold calculation, waiting for the right moment to demonstrate his strength. Then, with a crash, he landed back on the surface, not knowing how to get to these people. The hero noticed how much trouble he was in, admitting that the enemy turned out to be stronger than he expected. The dragon moved closer to examine his opponents, those who had so skillfully defended themselves from him. It was then that the main character put his plan into action, and a large explosion occurred that was supposed to stop the creature. At that very second, the guy and Letty flew up above the explosion. The dark elf princess asked in amazement where they were flying, not understanding his plan. Lime explained that she should wait downstairs while he dealt with the monster. After these words, the girl fell down, not fully realizing what was happening. Her scream faded away as her figure disappeared from the protagonist's field of vision. But the girl had nothing to be afraid of. She landed successfully and comfortably on the slime goblin. Lime activated his secret weapon, summoning this very same heroic slime spirit that appeared on the battlefield. While all these machinations were taking place, the creature obediently waited for its moment below. And it seemed that he was completely calm, not a bit doubting his own strength. The boy then used dark magic acceleration to increase his fighting capabilities. Now, with the boosted speed and the support of the slime goblin, Lime was ready to show his true strength in battle against the Thunder Dragon. Lime, using his acceleration, launched a rapid attack on the monster. The enemy tried to attack the main character, but it was impossible to even hit him. Lime was so fast that even the most powerful and accurate blow from the creature could not harm him. He used his dark magic to find weak spots in the monster's armor, but the dragon still wanted to harm the hero. Several pinpoint magic balls flying at high frequency could not catch up with Lime. As a result of the coordinated attack, the Thunder Dragon began to lose ground, unable to cope with such tactics. Lime demonstrated not only his magical powers, but also his strategic thinking. He managed to organize an effective attack against a superior enemy. Clouds of dust and a ringing silence remained at the site of the battle. The main character dropped back down to finish the fight he had started. Students and teachers ran as fast as they could, just to avoid getting hit. But the creature seemed to like this outcome of events. Lime announced that now that they were alone with the Thunder Dragon, it was time to play for real. He began to accumulate his magical energy to hit as hard as possible. The monster responded by screaming for its summoning. He summoned thunderclouds to strengthen his attack, as Lime expected. Therefore, he disappeared from the scene of the duel with lightning speed. A moment later, he found himself next to the vampire, who was cowardly peeping at what was happening from behind a pole. He then said that he would borrow something from the dragon, briefly confusing both the monster and the observers. After which he disappeared without waiting for approval of his request. The boy used dark magic elemental coating to protect himself from the enemy's electric attacks. These attacks happened again and again, flashing bright lightning across the sky, which were supposed to hit their target right on time. Lime continued to cast various dark spells, demonstrating the full depth of his magical abilities. The battle entered a decisive phase, where every next move could determine the winner. Lime continued to strike, using his new abilities to increase the pressure on his opponent. He immediately used one of the spells, a combination of Dark Sword Strike and Thunderclap. This powerful attack should have hit the Thunder Dragon, and so it happened. She left the monster to retreat under the pressure of dark and electric magic at the same time. At the site of this battle, an explosion occurred that spread for several meters. The creature turned out to be the defeated protagonist. Now he stood over the monster's body. After the battle, Lime received a notification that the third-level awakening quest had been completed, and new spells were now available to him. Someone was watching his victory, and had no intention of showing themselves to the hero. After some time, the teacher noted that this was the first time he had encountered such an unusual individual, and that he should report him to the principal. Vampire Haig and everyone else who heard these words were shocked. Letty, still sitting on the slime goblin, opened her eyes wide in surprise. Then the main character realized that the combat trials were over. He was ready to move on. A couple of hours later, there was no one left in the arena. The sun was shining in the sky, its rays reaching the Magic Academy. Letty walked up to Lime and the two of them stood and looked at the results of the recent exam. She said she had no doubt that the guy would pass the exam, but for some reason she was also accepted. Lime replied that she was the only one who first challenged the dragon, which was the reason for her success. Then they talked about her name, and Letty explained that her full name was Tiara Letitia Nilf. But it's too long, so you can just call her Letty. Lime agreed that this was logical and convenient for communication. Letty said she had forgotten to add something, and began writing letters on the list of applicants. When she finished, she smiled and said that it was better this way. The girl wrote down the guy's name, Lime. The main character was sweetly embarrassed. Now he had a name, he was happy about it. Lime and the other successful applicants were now standing and listening to the teacher. Letty admired with delight the cool uniforms they were given. They received their textbooks and robes, and the teacher presented them with a joyful look. The hero immediately threw on this cool robe to feel like a student of this academy. They were then taken to the dormitory, where they were told that before joining they would need to pass a selection test to receive a place in the dormitory. Lime asked in surprise, "Is this another test?" He didn't expect any more tests after such a difficult exam. The teacher explained that at their academy, the dormitory is divided according to the level of magic contained in the student's body. The academy had been preparing for the new test for several hours now. Letty and the main character stood and watched as everyone bustled about, waiting for their moment. The teacher himself watched the newcomers, wondering how they would pass this test. One of the students remarked that the two had been battle-tested, even though at first glance they didn't look like they were capable of anything. Another added that he heard that this year it was very tough, and only 2 people passed it, referring to Lime and Letty. The guys heard all this and saw how their persons attracted attention. Letty naturally didn't like this. She wanted to speak out about them. As soon as she started to get indignant, Lime calmed her down, saying that it was not so important now. His girlfriend noticed that the guy was too kind to these applicants. The hero was only concerned about a new test that would determine the living conditions of students at the academy based on their magical potential. They explained that everything was very simple. You just need to stand in front of a device that will automatically analyze the amount of dark magic. You just need to touch the panel with your palm, and the result will immediately appear on the screen. This device is the latest model, and the academy recently allocated funds for it. This is precisely why it is simply impossible to fool this device. Miss Letitia was the first to be called to take the test. Then Letty walked over and touched the panel. The device showed a staggering amount of dark magic in her body. This caused surprise among the observing students and teachers. Lime thought that this was as expected from the Dark Elf Princess. She had great potential. Letty was admitted to the Lucifer dormitory, where the academy's most powerful mages live, much to the admiration of onlookers. Then it was Lime's turn, and the teacher called him over. And although they will measure his strength, no one expects much from him, because he is a goblin after all. Lime was interested in how much stronger he had become after all the events and the awakening of new abilities. When he touched the instrument panel, something unexpected happened. The latest model of the device, which cost 500 gold pieces, began to show abnormal readings that did not meet expectations. The device broke after Lime touched its panel. It shattered into many small pieces, creating a glow and a short-lived wind. The teacher exclaimed in despair that this was the latest device, which cost 500 gold pieces. Lime tried to apologize by saying that cars break down, it happens. But they told him that this device had been recently purchased by the academy, and that it had worked perfectly before. The guy thought with annoyance that if he was assigned to the worst dorm, he would never meet the director at this rate. Lime had to come up with another way to meet him in order to fulfill his mission. He ended up being placed in a lower-ranking dormitory, which was a serious blow to his plans, and Letty was also unhappy about it. Lime thought about his situation. He was worried. It was ruining all his plans. Everyone watching around still couldn't get over what they saw. He was lost in his thoughts, not happy with himself. But now there was no choice. I had to go to my dorm. The hero sat on his bed and looked at the ads and thought about his situation. Now the main task was to kill the director and seize all the territories belonging to him. However, Lime understood that due to his own mistake, he was assigned to the lowest-ranking dormitory. He thought that maybe in the future he would be able to transfer to Lucifer's dorm with Letty, but it would take some effort. Suddenly something caught his attention and he stared at one point. Namely, on the textbook that he received recently. The hero noticed an announcement about an academic magic tournament, which is held once a year to identify the most powerful magician among the students. Lime decided to apply to participate after learning that anyone could take part. The most important thing was that the winner received a prize personally prepared by Director Dior. This tournament is a centuries-old tradition of the Academy, and anyone can participate in it. And the prize, it's still interesting to see what the director will prepare. After all, this meant an excellent chance to meet him in person. But suddenly they asked the guy. He had entered the academy only 2 years ago. The tournament organizer warned Lime that the magic tournament was a rather dangerous undertaking. Lime confirmed that he understands this, but still wants to take part despite the risks. The organizer understood that although anyone could participate, first-year students were not advised to attend the tournament. She asked the guy to wait a bit, and then went to her boss. There they discussed among themselves that a strange first-year student had come to see them. The man realized that this was the same boy who had broken the measuring device. The girl asked whether she should refuse his application. In the end, they accepted his application to participate and decided to give him a chance. But they warned that the organizers were not responsible for his safety at the tournament. Lime agreed to all the conditions, ready for the upcoming trials that would give him a chance to meet Director Dior. Meanwhile, Letty was in the dorm of the Lucifer Higher Magic Academy. It was evening in the women's wing now. The girls were taking a shower. Drops flowed down their graceful bodies, following their curves, washing away all fatigue. Letty was resting at that moment. She was thinking about the main character, and a smile appeared on her face by itself. Finishing the procedure, she put the jar of gel back in its place. The girl continued to think how lucky she was to meet him, because he even saved her life. The dark elf princess recalled how the boy had picked her up in his arms when he had helped her during the fight with the dragon. She admitted to herself that she saw something majestic in his figure. Letty wondered why, when she thought of him. Her heart beat so hard, with mixed feelings of admiration and affection. As if unable to take her eyes off him, as if she never wants to leave him. At the same time, in the low-ranking dormitory of the Magic Academy, Sarah, in the dead of night. Lime couldn't fall asleep for a long time. He had too many thoughts. Then another one came to his mind. Because the tournament was coming soon. A moment later, the guy moved from his bed to the roof of the dorm. He used his dark magic to summon a goblin priestess, who instantly appeared before him, ready to help him with the preparations. Lime knew that to win the tournament and face Deer, he needed to hone his skills and develop an effective strategy. But the priestess interrupted his thoughts. He asked why she was dressed in the academy uniform. The guy added to this that it was not at all necessary to dress like that, but if she wanted to, then so be it. He then asked the priestess to explore the school using her ghostly form, to which she happily agreed. The boy lifted his hood to see who had joined them. It was the fairy who informed Lime that the girl had been delivered and was under Lily's care. I immediately remembered the picture of a poor girl lying on the ground. Then the guy sincerely thanked the fairy for such help. Lime asks the fairy and the priestess to draw a detailed map of the academy's territory. The fairy replied that of course she could draw a map. Lime explained that their path lay straight to their intended goal. The young man and his team continue planning their next steps. The tower of the director of the Magic Academy appeared. Here the main character climbed along the roof to get even closer. Dark magic shadow camouflage was used. This should help partially hide his presence. Here the hero was already at his goal. He was standing near the window, through which everything was perfectly visible and audible. The council's conversations could be heard. They were discussing something very heatedly. At this table sat the council headman, Wesker, Chief Secretary of the Magic Tournament Administration, Milan, also Eddie's teacher, and also the Student Council President, the Dragon Man Kaya. Teacher Eddie, adjusting his glasses, said that the main character is dangerous. He vehemently opposed its presence, calling it a desecration of the establishment's centuries-old traditions. The members of the Academic Council reluctantly admitted that they had grossly underestimated the powers and potential of the young mage. The council headman confirmed that such a show of force came as a complete surprise to them. The indignant teacher shouted that Lime was just a goblin, a representative of an inferior race, and his presence was unthinkable. He echoed the council members, wondering how this creature had even been allowed to take the exams. Council Chief Wesker calmly asked if they would allow him to participate in the deadly tournament. The chief secretary cynically noted that not everyone was happy to see a goblin here. Tired of the intrigue, Wesker thought that the council members, as always, had radical solutions to such a minor problem. It soon became clear that the headman had allowed anyone who wanted to take the entrance exams. The thought was voiced again that formally the rights were equal. But the reality was that the goblin was not expected here. The guy heard this clearly. Elder Wesker considered the council members' words. But I decided that since everything had already been decided, so be it. And now it was time to get ready for bed. Mylene wondered with surprise if the director had really approved of their actions so easily. It was not like him at all. Eddie gave Kaya the order to rig the tournament bracket so that Lime would immediately face the strongest. Kaya immediately agreed without question. The hero thought that he would gladly fight him too, having heard their plan. The chief secretary noted that the aristocrat was directing all his efforts to get rid of some goblin, while smiling. An irritated Edie abruptly cut Milena off, accusing her of completely misunderstanding the situation. Lime realized that he wouldn't see anything more interesting, so he decided to leave. On the roof of the building, he met a goblin priestess. She reported the discovery of a secret passage in the dungeon. This secret passage was located in the academy's library. The fairy came to announce that she had drawn a map of the academy, as she had been asked. The guy thanked everyone and said that that was all for today. Suddenly I heard some sounds and asked with keen interest what else was there. This unknown guy was apparently training before an important event. The main character was surprised. Training like this until late at night must be very difficult. The fairy noticed that he had been training since the map had begun to be drawn up. The boy trained diligently, his movements accompanied by sharp cries of effort. Lime replied that everyone has their own hard time living in this world. The hero returned to his room. He wanted to rest. Looking tired, he called out to the fairy and asked what she was doing on his bed. At this time, she was already almost in a deep sleep. But she quickly got up and asked if he could allow her to sleep on a chair or on the floor. The annoying fairy, speaking of her beauty, offered to share her bed with him. Lime's answer warned her that he might accidentally crush her in her sleep. Suddenly a pink explosion appeared in which the fairy hid. But after some time she appeared again in front of the main character. Having transformed herself, she asked him if he would like her to look like this. The hero had already begun to simply beg the girl to leave him alone and let him sleep. The fairy calmly flew into the air and told the guy to calm down because she was just joking. Before going to bed, Lime decided he needed to take stock of what he had learned. Looking at the piece of paper, he understood that tomorrow would be a hard day. It was noisy in the academy's cafeteria early in the morning. The canteen was filled with students. Lima was thoughtful. He silently ate his breakfast and looked into one place. Far away from him, Letty was laughing for some reason. She was apparently sitting with her new friends. She noticed a guy sitting alone and turned her gaze to him. She immediately began to wave her hand at him, joyfully greeting him. He waved back shyly and thought that maintaining communication with a girl who lived in the most elite dorm was not so easy. He then continued to eat breakfast, holding the piece of paper in his hands and realizing that the magic tournament would begin in 5 days. The stranger approached Lime and asked if he could sit down with him. Lime allowed him to sit down next to him, to which the guy thanked him. Lime realized that this was the guy who had been studying until the night, and he clarified that the hero was new to Sir's dorm. He was also from there. Just then, the guy started to get interested in the magic tournament. An aggressive student attacked him, shouting that a kobold had no place among them. The guy tried to timidly defend himself, saying that all students have the right to dine here. But the other one didn't care. He mocked him, saying that he shouldn't eat from the garbage dump. The guy was very scared and answered why this was happening to him if he had not broken any rules. Lime grabbed the offender by the arm when he wanted to hit the blonde. Nero was very surprised by this and asked who else he was. Hearing the hero's answer that he was a goblin, he repeated his words. Thinking about it, he realized that the guy was a newbie goblin. He smiled a sly smile and offered to explain the local rules to the guy in a brotherly manner. 2 more of his accomplices stood behind him, asking if Lime was against such events. The main character was all for it. With a smile on his face, he was already waiting for them to take action. Finding himself between 2 guys, the blonde was scared. He didn't know what to do, because now a fight could break out because of him. Shouting that the newcomer needed to be taught a lesson in discipline, the offender swung at Lime. But the hero confidently parried this attack without much effort. The enemy was shocked by this turn of events. He frowned, not understanding how this had happened. The fair-haired guy was also surprised. He stood with his mouth open and watched what would happen next. Holding his opponent's hand, Lime thought that now was not the time to use magic in front of the other students. So, it was necessary to finish everything the old-fashioned way. Begging to let him go, Nero couldn't understand where this newbie got such strength from. The people watched the goblin's next actions with bated breath and wide eyes. When the hero let go of his opponent's hand, a red mark remained where Lime had held him. Then, already kneeling in front of the main character, the guy held his sore arm and tried not to scream too loudly. Then the hero, looking at the offender, replied that anyone could dine in this canteen and asked if he understood. Looking down at the guy who had recently hurt him, Nero didn't understand what the hell was going on. 2 of his friends pointed at the guy sitting there and said that this first-year student had defeated a dragon single-handedly during the entrance exams. Nero's eyes lit up with anger and fear at the same time when he heard this. He didn't respond to this, and began to raise himself up on his hands. Only after getting up did he say that Lime was not going to survive anyway, since the dragon people had noticed him. The guy listened to this without the slightest fear. He didn't even bat an eyelash. Lima's new acquaintance thanked him from the bottom of his heart, and apologized for the fact that he had to get into a fight. The guy admitted that he also applied to participate in the magic tournament. He wanted to win to wipe their noses, but he had doubts. The guy said that such a weakling wasn't even capable of fighting back, and that it was all ridiculous to hope to think that he could do anything at all. For several seconds, Lime couldn't find what to answer to this monologue, but the silence was broken again by the blonde man. He realized with fright that he hadn't even introduced himself. He had called himself Arcady's Buttercup, and Lime responded by giving his name. Having thought over Dandelion's words, he was surprised that that was his name, and even asked again. He remembered that in the future, Dandelion Arcadia would be able to cope with a multi-million army single-handedly, and he will be the strongest swordsman on the continent. And among his enemies, he will be known as the Black Knight. The boys said goodbye to each other while in the lower-rank dormitory of Sir. But suddenly Lime asked Dandelion to wait, which made him startle. He said that if the guy wanted, he could train with him at night. Buttercup was all for it. He suggested trying together. Then the hero suggested meeting today. But from that moment on, he asked to be honest with him. Buttercup was surprised by this condition. Lime explained that his sister, if he was not mistaken, was the reincarnation of one of the 7 great divine demons. His sister is soon supposed to go with missionaries to a village that is located on the border with human territory. Lime asked to warn her that it was dangerous there, and that it would be better for her to stay at home. The guy said that if Dandelion did as he asked, they would be held accountable for that incident in the cafeteria. Dandelion was shocked that the hero knew such details, but replied that he understood everything. Now they have definitely said goodbye. As Lime began to retreat, a pink magical stripe formed around him. It was a fairy who asked the hero if he was up to something again. The guy was in his own thoughts. He was thinking about Dandelion. In the game, his sister was dying. What he did was supposed to change everything. A few days later, it was deep night in the forest behind the Magic Academy. But in the middle of the forest, there was a bright blue glow near the fountain, which made it light all around. The main character stood next to this place. he trained his strength by sending it in different directions. After several attempts, he came to the conclusion that, in principle, everything was fine. Not far from him stood Dandelion Arcadia with a sword, concentrating on himself. Having gathered his strength and decided what he wanted to do now, his eyes lit up with excitement. The next moment he rushed forward with incredible speed to strike. Then he stopped abruptly and cut the air with his weapon, leaving behind a yellow light. He noted with delight that he had succeeded in accomplishing what he had planned. Dandelion was very happy that he managed to make such a cut with an ordinary sword. Lime supported him and rejoiced with him. The guy was absolutely sure that this was all thanks to the advice of the main character, because he did not know that blows could be improved by enchanting the sword. Dandelion was wondering how Lime ended up in Sir's dorm. It must have been some kind of mistake. Since he was so strong, the hero thanked him. Sitting down to rest, the blonde reminded them that this was their last training session before the start. Tomorrow was the first day of the tournament. Liutik listened very attentively, and fascinated to Lime's words about the guy's true strength being in his determination. He also added that by training with him every night, he realized something. The fact that his true abilities were not fully revealed made the blonde man open his mouth in surprise. After all, usually hidden powers like his are revealed during a strong emotional shock, and if something like this happens, he will of course gain strength. But he will completely lose his mind. It seems that Dandelion did not really understand what was being discussed. Lime asked the guy not to take it to heart. These were just his thoughts out loud. Then, putting his hand to Buttercup's face, he asked him to close his eyes. Using magic, he saw that almost all of the blonde's dark energy was sealed. It's as if these iron chains are keeping a rabid beast under control. Dandelion can become stronger if the shackles on his body are removed. Last time, the impetus for his growth was a tragedy that changed his whole life. He wanted to continue using magic, so he asked Dandelion not to move. He looked him straight in the eyes. The magic was already striking the guy. Placing his hand on his shoulder, Lime whispered that he was finished. Dandelion said that it felt like he had just been pierced with stakes. He asked what it was. The hero replied that training was over for today. He suggested going to rest. A hard day awaited him tomorrow. Buttercup agreed with him, looking tired and saying that it was indeed time to go. In the middle of the forest, there stood a coliseum in a magical academy. The opening ceremony of the magic tournament took place here today. Lime walked confidently towards her, with a crowd of other participants. Dandelion was walking next to everyone else. He seemed a little nervous. Kaya entered the arena with representatives of his race. And so they came out to announce the start of the tournament. The girl shouted so that everyone could hear. Everyone had been waiting for this for so long, and now this day had come. This event has been held by the Academy since its foundation, and it has left no one indifferent. The girl continued that the start of the tournament would be announced by the founder and beloved director, Mr. Dewar. A magic circle began to appear in the center of the Colosseum. It was magic, a hologram that allowed everyone to see the director. At first, Lime thought it was magic similar to goblin kinship, but after thinking about it, he realized that the connection was coming from another place. Director Dewar began the grand opening by saying that the participants were the future force of the Demon Royal Army. He asked to show what they had learned over all the years spent at the Academy, because there was only one rule here: kill or be killed. A roar came from the stands at the director's call to prove that their lives were worth something. Letty stood thoughtfully, her head down. She was worried. A hidden goblin village suffers from tyrannical rule. Lime promised himself that he would definitely win the tournament and kill this arrogant bastard. Now the guy was standing alone against the wall and looking at something important on his piece of paper. He found out that to get to the finals he needed to win 6 times in a row. All he had to do was give it his all. Lime looked at this whole scheme with great interest and thoughtfulness, realizing who his first opponent would be. Suddenly a glass of drink was held up to his face. He was so surprised that he shouted to the whole neighborhood that the glass was very cold. He jumped back a few steps, grabbed the place on his face where it was still cold and asked what was going on. It was Letty who brought him a refreshing drink and asked him with a joyful look why he was shouting like that. She said she just came to cheer him up, to which Lime replied that there was no need to sneak up on him like that. The girl asked not to be offended by this, and asked if first-year students weren't prohibited from participating in the tournament. The guy immediately replied that the rules didn't say that. First years are not welcome here, but no one is stopping them from participating, so Lime asked why she was interested. The girl silently sipped her cocktail, hinting that it didn't matter. But she still answered that everything was fine. But why did he just enroll and immediately sign up for the tournament? She added that her hero seemed much calmer and more reserved. He simply surprised her with this act. That's all. In his thoughts, Lime was thinking that if Letty found out why he was participating in this, she would immediately scold him. Letty twisted her face in displeasure and said that Lime was acting too mysterious today. Suddenly she remembered the treat she had prepared for the guy, took it out and handed it to Lime. The main character began to look in surprise at what she had in her hand. The girl untied the bag and showed what was inside. She smiled shyly when she saw Lime's reaction. He was surprised that Letty decided to return her debt. Fidgeting awkwardly with her fingers, she explained that thanks to his chocolate, she was able to give it her all, she thought. She continued enthusiastically that this gesture was just a way to apologize for what happened. Having told him not to take chocolate seriously, the girl covered her face with her hands, realizing that she had said nonsense. But the boy was still very grateful, because this was the first time that someone other than his sister had shown him such kindness. Looking at their watches, the guys realized that the tournament was about to start. Letty held out her fist to Lime and confidently told him to beat everyone there. The hero responded to this gesture, and now they looked like true friends. As soon as the guy headed to the tournament, the girl's heart began to pound wildly in her chest. She did not understand what was happening to her. A sufficient number of spectators had already gathered to watch the first fight of the magic tournament. Then the participants of the first battle were announced. A student from the Sir Dormitory, a goblin named Lime. He stood out from all the first years by defeating a dragon. His opponent was a dragon man from the Lucifer Dormitory, Orphan Escudo, a member of the Breath of Flame faction and their right hand. This young man had enough admirers who shouted from the stands that Orphan was beautiful and encouraged him to beat this goblin. Milene, observing this, commented that it wasn't too suspicious to put the second most powerful dragon man in a newcomer's first fight. The head of the council did not comment on this in any way. He simply observed the course of events. The performers prepared themselves, entered the arena, and were allowed to begin. Orphan was confident that he would quickly finish off the hero. He used the wyvern skill. His fans were simply delighted with him. They admired how elegantly he soared into the sky. Then the dragon man used dark magic, a magical coating. Heading straight for Lime, he said that the newcomer was finished. The main character, watching him, thought that it was all very simple for a dragon man. Suddenly, a characteristic cracking sound of the earth was heard under the guy's feet. Chains began to appear around, as if out of nowhere. They wrapped Lime up, not allowing him to move. He was completely shackled. Watching all this, Letty was very worried about the main character. Looking at the shackled Lime, Orphan grinned. He said, "Did he really think that he would fight fairly?" The hero was a little confused, but a plan for defeating the dragon man was already maturing in his head. He noticed another dragon man, a tritium in strength from the Lena Flame Breath faction, hiding behind the stands. But while he couldn't do anything about it, Orphan was rushing towards him, shouting for the newcomer to die. Now the main character felt real fear from the hopelessness of this situation. There was an explosion at the place where he stood, and only dust and stones flew around. All the girls were very happy, as they were sure that the dragon man had won. Only Letty, with a frozen mask of horror on her face, uttered the hero's name. Looking at the arena, completely empty, I wanted to cry. However, not all was lost. Lime decided to use his power and not hold back any longer. He uses the summoning of the dark sword Mjolnir. With it, he already felt stronger. Seeing the hero still alive and full of strength, his opponent screamed in indignation. He did not understand why the hell this happened. He tried to hit him again, but Lime got ahead of his thoughts and flew into the air. Without a second's hesitation, he delivered the decisive blow with the blunt end of his weapon to the back of Orphan's head. Standing on the ground, I approached him to check how things were going with him. After examining him, the guy announced that it seemed the dragon man would no longer be able to get up, so the fight could be considered over. Lime was declared the winner, and the stands cheered. The council members couldn't believe their eyes and ears. The council headman himself thought about this, and realized that Lime's supply of dark energy was equal to the SSS wound. Letty was beaming with happiness. She always hoped and believed in the strength of the main character. Walking out of the arena quite calmly, the guy thought that the first fight was over. A joyful Lily appeared on his path, greeting him with a wave of her hand. Next to her was the goblin girl whom the guy had saved. The fairy answered the hero that they wanted to see his fight, saying that they were obliged to support Lime. Lily looked at her brother with admiration and said how cool he beat up that guy. The goblin added that the hero was simply incredible. Having patted them on the tops of their heads as a sign of gratitude, Lime was very glad that they liked it. Suddenly, out of nowhere, something that looked like a gift appeared in the girl's hands. The hero asked again if it was true that the girl's name was Mia, and that it was she, together with Lily, who had prepared the pie for him and wrapped it so beautifully. He happily thanked both his sister and Mia. They encouraged the guy with hope, telling him to try harder in the next round. They would be rooting for him. In the waiting room, the protagonist looked out the window, waiting for the second round, which was about to begin. A girl ran up to him and began to tremble, saying that they were in trouble. It seemed that his companions had suffered greatly. The main character immediately ran to look for them, shouting out his sister to them. He was sure that they were in the place where he had just come, but they were not there. Behind the guy, a terrible gloating voice was heard which said, "Indeed, where are they?" He felt his leg being grabbed again, and green branches magically sprouted from the ground. Gradually, he became completely immobilized, and he realized that he had fallen into a trap. They had used his relationship with his sister to lure him in. It was Dragon Man Lena. The guy asked her if she was a member of the Breath of Flame, to which she only laughed. But a second later, the guy broke the shackles and said that her trick didn't work on him. With an absolutely unsurprised look, Lena replied that she already understood this. but her hand pointed to more help from behind. It turned out that she had no intention of being her opponent at all. Kaya came out and replied that he didn't really care about the tournament and its rules. Right now, all the dragonmen would be his opponents. He pointed his finger at the hero, saying that no one would come to his aid, and this place would become his grave. The main character did not react to all the insults. He remained true to his principles and strengths. The other dragonmen began to laugh at him, thinking that he had lost his speech due to fear. Lime didn't respond to their nagging, only repeating to himself that there were 3 minutes left. He showed 3 minutes on his fingers, repeating it out loud again, looking into Kay's eyes. Then the guy said that this was the time until the next fight began. So he suggested finishing it faster, which made the Dragon Man furious. There was rage in his eyes, he said, if he really wanted to die. The Dragon Man is very willing to help with this. The protagonist stood up to accumulate his energy, telling him to show what he was capable of. Lime knew he needed to release as much dark magic as possible, and while the guy thought that he would just be able to warm up before the second round, Kaya took the form of the salamander. Then he used fire magic, an explosion of primordial flame. The hero did not lag behind either. He, in turn, used dark magic. Namely, the shadow curtain, which helped him repel the enemy's attack. Why did a fiery explosion occur on the battlefield? But Lime was not afraid. He steadfastly held his magic and controlled it. More dragonmen rushed towards him, shouting at the same time that this idiot had forgotten about them. However, no one expected that the guy would be able to work with both hands at the same time, using a dark blade in his right hand, adding dark magic and hellish flames to his opponents. For a second, the guy was distracted and stopped using the shadow curtain. At this time, the Dragon Man released another fireball. Because of this, a huge and powerful wave of energy rushed towards him, which was further fueled by Kaya's other allies. In the end, there was an explosion of simultaneous attacks, behind which it was impossible to see whether the hero had been hit or not. But the Dragonmen had no doubt that they had finished with this damn newcomer. However, the main character was quicker and more agile than these guys. He deftly went around them from behind and struck with his weapon. In one fell swoop, he was able to defeat all his opponents. The pillar of energy completely amazed them. No one expected it. All his magic went completely into the ground. The Dragon Man at the very end stood with his eyes wide open, but only emptiness was visible in them, due to the magic that had affected his entire body. Kaya was very angry. He couldn't believe that Lime dared to do such a thing. He decided to use the ultimate form of the Dragon Man salamander. He screamed at the top of his lungs that this goblin would definitely meet his end. The guy directed all his strength into one hand, concentrating on dark magic, strengthening muscles. He struck the huge dragon in the jaw with this hand. The dragon immediately recoiled from this attack, even though it seemed like the difference in size between them was significant. In addition, Lime wanted to finish off his opponent and therefore swung at him again. Everything around was shining with his powerful force. Now the blow hit the beast in the belly and with even greater force. With a scream, the Dragon Man fell to the ground, and he turned back into human form. With shock on his face, he continued to lie on the ground. Shaking off the battle from his hands, the hero still remembered that not everyone was finished. Lena was hiding behind the wall, looking at this whole picture with fear. The guy gradually approached her and asked her to listen to what he was about to say. Finding himself very close, he only asked what time it was. Lena asked him again, not sure she had heard everything correctly, but the guy only added that he was clarifying about the start of the second round. Hearing that only 30 seconds had passed, he turned away and replied that this was excellent, since he would have time to reach the arena. The Dragon Man Lena crouched down in fear, her legs no longer supporting her. Meanwhile, Lime was already standing in the middle of the Magic Academy. The Magic Tournament was starting the second round. His opponent was supposed to be one of the Dragonmen, but since no one showed up, the Goblin Lime was considered the winner in this round as well. His sister and Miyu looked at this in surprise, how the fight ended so quickly. Eddie was furious at this news and screamed, not understanding how this was possible. The headman, on the contrary, smiled. He scratched his beard and said that this boy turned out to be lucky. Another girl, Letty, was also very happy, literally radiating light. Luck was on their side. Lily said that she didn't know how it happened, but her brother won. Miyu replied that it was very good. Lime won the other 3 fights because his opponents did not show up for the fight. Eddie didn't even want to look at all this, but Lime's victory was already clear. He had defeated them all earlier. But the last fight still took place. Lime greeted his opponent, saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. It turned out to be his good friend Lutic Arkady, who looked very serious. He replied to the hero that, thanks to him, he was able to become stronger, and he was very glad to meet the guy in the final. The hero realized that Buttercup's sister apparently hadn't died either, and he responded to the guy's kind gesture by saying that he was also glad to see him as his opponent. After talking a little more, they were ready to start the battle. But as soon as he took hold of the handle, his hands seemed to not want to take it. The guy added that he would like to say this, however. He raised both hands, indicating that he was ready to surrender. Buttercup explained that he was truly grateful for everything Lime had done for him, so he wanted to thank him somehow. But Lime didn't like it. He understood that it was unfair. After all, He was still waiting to be able to fight him in the final. He asked Dandelion, since he was so grateful, to let him fight him. The blonde again put his hands on his weapon. With a sly look in his eyes and a terrifying smile, he replied that if that was the case, he would not hold back. As soon as he said this, they simultaneously ran towards each other. A cloud of smoke formed, behind which nothing could be seen at first. In fencing, as expected, Buttercup has no equal. He cut through everything around him very deftly with his sword, but he was unable to damage Lime's eye. When Dandelion was fighting, he looked very stern, not like in everyday life. All this was thanks to the magic of the Dark Knight. The hero knew this for sure. The bearer of this title receives colossal physical abilities. However, Lime still saw that the blonde had not yet fully realized his potential. Therefore, the main character had every chance of winning. Lily and Miyu watched this fight. They saw that this guy was stronger than everyone who had fought with Lime before. They mentally wished him luck. Letty was also in the audience, looking at the arena in awe and telling herself how cool it was. Edie and Secretary Mylene were yelling at Dandelion to just finish off this goblin, asking him to beat him up without even knowing Dandelion. But of course, none of this could be heard down below. The boys were busy with their battle. Lima was thrown back a little by one blow from Dandelion. He moved to strike again from above, shouting at the guy that he was about to get it. And perhaps he would have succeeded in accomplishing what he had planned. But Lime managed to dodge at the last moment and Arcadia's Dandelion missed. I leaned forward a little more and almost fell. Now power was in the hands of his opponent, the goblin Lime. He furiously told his rival that he was finished. He made a wide swing but couldn't even touch Dandelion, who deftly jumped away. A little more and the blonde would have ended up on the ground, but he was able to stand and maintain his balance. Lime stood and thought about how Dandelion was able to parry his blow and not even get hurt. He found it interesting. His opponent looked at his sword thoughtfully. He wanted to use some kind of technique. After thinking for a moment, he threw the weapon out of his hands completely. The hero looked at his opponent with incomprehension. Then he also decided to continue with his bare hands, only he did not throw away, but hit his sword with the help of magic. Dandelion didn't expect the main character to be so brave and follow his example in this regard. The Dark Knight's magic was based on shadow illusions, and yet Lime wanted to fight him on equal terms. Without any illusions of deception, he stood with his head held high when he made this decision. He told his opponent that he was not going to use dark magic against him. He wanted to fight him face to face. Buttercup stood there as if he were mad and said that he could take the risk. Even the judge became afraid to be in the arena, so he decided to quietly leave. A few seconds later, the opponents again faced each other. Two opposites, even in the color of their magic. It was so strange, even though they were fighting seriously. But for some reason, Lime was having so much fun. At that moment, Liutik was sure that the guy wanted to win, but he really didn't want this fight to end. With each blow, he felt himself becoming stronger and stronger. And it's just incredible how it could have happened like this. The last, most powerful blow was accompanied by an explosion. He pushed the opponents away from each other. Lime didn't immediately realize what had happened. I assumed that Dandelion could have leveled up during the fight with him. He realized the risks that he could lose, but he still took the risk and asked Dandelion to attack. As soon as the hero decided to strike, it turned out that the blonde seemed to pass through him. He looked like a hologram, not Dandelion himself. Then, unexpectedly, a kick landed right on Lime's jaw. Only then did the protagonist realize that his opponent had used the Dark Knight's ultimate skill, time stopping. If this was really the case, and Dandelion had truly revealed this ability so soon, the hero had no choice but to use his power. The thought made his eyes light up with anticipation. The fight began on a new level, and although Lime's blows were accurate and powerful, Buttercup skillfully blocked them. Then he was able to catch the hero's hand at one point, saying that he was caught. But at that moment the opponent disappeared as if he had never been there. Buttercup was worried that this was all an illusion, and started looking around in search of the guy. Before he could find it, the blonde was hit by a large explosion. He screamed in surprise and pain. I fell to my knees, as I was already exhausted. The explosion was indeed very powerful. There was nothing but despair in his eyes. The next moment he fell powerlessly to the ground of the arena. The winner of the final round was declared to be the goblin Lime, who stood over the prone Dandelion, whispered to him that he had become much stronger. And although Dandelion was unconscious, his brain still remembered these words. At the final stage of the magic tournament, the award ceremony, the main character stood before the council. And, although she didn't want it, the secretary still had to say words of congratulations on the victory. The guy knew and saw that it was not sincere, but he said thank you for the sake of decency. Only the head of the council truly congratulated the young man from the bottom of his heart, and said that the trophy was rightfully his. He also said that a little later he would be summoned to a personal audience with King Dior, and he would personally present the prize. The hero was waiting for this news most of all. He replied that he understood everything. As soon as he was about to leave, the headman asked him to stay, and asked who he really was. He added, a first-year student who won the magic tournament, defeating the strongest students of the academy. These words did not please the teacher Eddie at all. He did not even try to hide it. But Wesker continued, saying that it would not be an understatement to say that he definitely stood out from the rest. He also said that he realized that there had been countless attempts to kill the guy at this tournament, which made the council members tense. There was a lot of discussion about this from the crowd. The headman explained that those who planned this would be severely punished, and that the same fate awaited him, since he was supposed to stop them. Wesker apologized to the guy for having to go through all this hell, bowing his head. The hero realized that he didn't remember this old magician as a character, but he gave the impression of being a good person. When the council leader asked the hero what the academy was missing, the boy replied that the academy accepted students of any race. But as soon as he found himself within these walls, he saw the exact opposite of the stated attitude, both on the part of the teachers. The same was true for the students, although they could be more aggressive than others. Lime believed that the curriculum itself was not bad, but the discrimination came from the very heart of the academy, starting with the dormitories based on rank, ending with teachers who discriminate against others based on race, hinting at the council members standing behind them. Wesker understood what was going on, replied that he would take everything he said into account, and thanked him. With a sly smile and a sense of self-worth, Lime looked at the frightened teachers. After all these events, the two rivals met again on a clear, sunny day. Dandelion sincerely congratulated the hero on his victory. Lime thanked him. He was glad that his final opponent was him, adding that he fought simply superbly. The blonde replied that fighting in the tournament was so much fun, it was just a shame that it had come to an end. As soon as Dandelion heard that the main character wanted to ask him for something, he became enthusiastic about it and said that he would do everything. Then the hero admitted that he was actually planning to leave the academy soon. Buttercup didn't understand why, since he had just started here, to which Lime replied that he had his own reasons for leaving this place. But he promised that he would return, asking only that Dandelion become his ally for the rest of his life. He didn't understand why he was asking for such a thing. They were already friends. Then the boy asked if he could call him a friend if King Deer himself and his entire retinue declared him an enemy. He doubted why Lime was asking for this so suddenly, but he replied that he promised and extended his hand. He said that no matter what happened, he would always be on his side. The main character, with a smile on his face, thanked the guy, and he added that he wanted to praise Dandelion. His sword skills had noticeably improved. Lime said that he won only thanks to his tricks, without which he would have definitely lost. After that, they agreed that Dandelion would continue training until the day they could meet again, and began to say goodbye. Buttercup waved his hand enthusiastically at the guy. In a good mood, the guy went about his business. Suddenly footsteps were heard, shoes quickly tapping on the tiles. The girls hurried to Lime. They hugged him by both arms and began to congratulate him on his victory. The guy thanked them for coming to support him. A girl was watching their conversation, hiding behind a tree. She was very surprised when she noticed that there were two unfamiliar girls next to him. And in general, she did not understand why she was sitting here and hiding. She grabbed her head from her thoughts. Returning to the village, Lima felt as if he hadn't been there for a whole year. The children, seeing him, squealed with joy. They shouted that their brother was back. Then all the kids ran out and started to rejoice and go crazy. Everyone was shouting that their little brother Savior had returned. They asked to play with them. They all reached out to him, asking what kind of strange clothes he was wearing. They were also Lily and Mew. But suddenly he noticed someone approaching them. It was an older man who walked with a cane. He pointed his finger somewhere down, at the ground. Or rather, on the goblins that worked on this land. There were also goblins sitting next to them, having fun and dining. This old man said that their village began to flourish, and all thanks to him, the Lime. The advice on improving the quality of life in the village was very helpful. I remembered how he gave this advice. Then he said that there was a lack of food for all the villagers because of the very infertile land. When asked why they decided to settle here, the grandfather replied that their family was driven out by everyone. Wherever they went, they didn't have much of a choice. The guy didn't like this at all and said that they shouldn't look for new land anymore. Throughout the village, there are magical seals that defile the land, sucking the life out of it. He realized this after examining the village and its inhabitants. He also added that he thinks it wasn't a goblin who put these seals on. And in order to live here peacefully, these seals must be destroyed. Then the elder asked if Lime could destroy them. The guy said with enthusiasm in his voice that of course he could. To destroy all the seals at once, you need to destroy the largest seal that hangs over the village. Based on the game's materials, goblins have almost no magic, and the hero did not think that no one in the settlement could know such a powerful spell. Lime realized that something had deliberately driven the goblins into a trap, forcing them to live on this land without even giving them the means to survive. He knew how to fight villains, and whoever it was, he would pay. The main character knew that for sure. He promised the headman that now everything would be fine with the village. The land was no longer cursed, and the water source would soon be restored. Later, the hero returned to his companions, and they offered him to try their new dishes. The children were very happy when they heard the word food. The guy was also very pleased with this offer. This is how fun the main character's entrance to the goblin village was. On this day, smiles adorned the faces of the townspeople. The guy thought that if the goddess saw this, she would be pleased. The next morning was sunny and warm. The girls ran quickly to wake up Lime and asked him to get up quickly. Finally getting up, the guy announced that it was time for him to return to the academy. They were very upset when they heard this from him, since he had only arrived yesterday. Hearing that, at least for a day, thanks to their care, he was able to have a good rest. The girls smiled, and, as he was already leaving, handed him a gift. He took it in his hands, and not understanding what it was, asked them. Miyu said that she made this bracelet together with Lily. Lily added that it was an amulet and would protect him from anything bad that might come his way. Having understood their words, he looked with kindness at his hand, on which the bracelet was already hanging. They were very glad that he liked it, and said they would look forward to his return. Now the boy stood alone in the room with the goblin fairy. She explained the course of action to him. First, he must go to an audience with King Deer. It would be difficult to defeat him. But the hero asked not to worry, he already had a plan ready. He knew everything about him, all the techniques and fighting style, so he was sure that he would not lose. The fairy thought it was strange. She was almost sure that the goddess had not granted him the power of clairvoyance. Then how does he know everything about him? Having asked this, she thought even more. The fairy was surprised by her own thoughts and asked the guy if he was really a goblin. The hero laughed at her question, but still answered that he was a very ordinary goblin. It was time to set out for an audience with the king, to the magical continent, the castle of King Deer. The king himself was in the throne room, and naturally sat on his throne. He thought about the goblin boy who won the tournament. The king found it curious. But before heading to the king, Lime wanted to try out his new fast travel skill. He told the fairy that she would now see it all for herself, and asked her to reach into her pocket. Then he pressed something on the magic screen, and he instantly disappeared somewhere along with the fairy that was in his pocket. They ended up in Sir's dorm, Lime's room. All this happened in a matter of seconds. The fairy, sitting leisurely, asked how he had managed to master teleportation, but apparently was not at all surprised. Lime could teleport to any place he had been before, which was a common thing in the game, but he realized that he shouldn't show it here. He replied to the fairy that, in fact, he only needed to pick up the invitation to an audience. And now we can hit the road. King Dior's castle looked terrifying, as if it were located in hell itself. There was only one guard standing guard at the large, heavy gates. Noticing that someone was approaching, he became wary. The main character approached his destination through dust, sand, and dirt. The guard stopped him with a shout. He asked who was coming. He added that there was no place for lower demons like him here, and demanded that he get lost. At the entrance to the castle, the guard searched Lime suspiciously, not even missing his weapon, but the boy showed the invitation letter. Lime stood silently in front of the massive gate until the frightened guard began to mumble apologies. The guard, having come to his senses, began to apologize humbly and hastily let him inside. The castle looked luxurious inside, despite being very terrifying from the outside. Lime was impressed to note that the castle of one of the Demon King's 7 generals looked truly impressive. The fairy asked him if Lime had really come here to look at the castle. He replied that this was not so, and she knew it perfectly well, and he was just trying to distract himself. One of the guards coldly announced that he had been expected and invited him to follow. He respectfully showed them the way deeper into the castle. The main character followed where the man pointed. Looking around, he entered the castle. At the central gate, the guard continued to stand in absolute silence, only yawning quietly. Suddenly someone approached this gate and just stood there for a while, not daring to approach, but he still started calling the guard. He asked this man who he was. He explained that the student who had recently entered had prepared a gift for the king, but had become upset and forgotten it. They had asked permission to give it to him. Looking around and at the gate, so that no one would see it, the man allowed me to pass, but only quickly. In the depths of the hall, a figure in majestic dark armor sat on a throne. Lime found himself in the throne room of the castle of the Demon King Dior. Lime politely thanked him for the invitation, and introduced himself to the Demon King as a goblin student at the Magic Academy. The Demon King noted with interest that he was not aware of such power among the goblins. He was surprised, and thought that the guy had mastered dark magic himself. The hero remembered at this time that he had often fought with this demon in the game, but in real life, it felt completely different. The king then remarked that it would be better for him if he joined their army in the future. According to the tournament rules, he was obliged to hand over one of the rare treasures, so the choice arose between the cursed sword Arendite, with the powerful shield of the demon wing, and the magical armor of the chains of Hades. The hero understood that all these things were legendary weapons that could be dropped from the boss with a low drop rate. He soon replied that he would take the sword Arendite, and the king handed it to him without further questions. But he asked Lime to come himself and receive his reward. Suddenly he continued speaking, saying that when he became king, he ordered his forces to obtain a special stone to decorate the throne room. The guy stood and listened to him, sensing a catch in his voice. And now, when a demon with evil intentions enters the throne room, the stone glows red. And now everything very quickly flashed with a red glow. A huge wave of aggression came from the king towards the hero. The guy flew several meters but managed to stay on his feet. He didn't expect that the king himself could attack him. From the very beginning, Lime was trapped. Now he was wounded. The king smiled, saying that it was good that the guy had reacted so quickly to his blow. The demon king, filled with rage, jumped from his throne and ordered his guards to kill Lime immediately. Suddenly, holes began to appear in the floor, and the burning eyes of demons appeared. They also began to emerge from the walls. They simply appeared from the shadows, and each looked terrifying in their own way. Everyone was armed and equally negatively disposed towards the main character. Lime himself stood and simply waited. He didn't yet know what to do. He hissed at them and at this situation, angry at himself, how he could have gotten caught like this. The demons had gathered in countless numbers, but they kept coming and coming. Dior said that the guy could throw a tantrum and beg for mercy. But for his thoughts, he would face a punishment worse than death itself. The hero was truly surprised and could not hide it. He replied that since the king knew about his intentions, there was no point in hiding them any longer. The guy really had come here for his head. After his death, this territory will belong to the Goblin Lime. He explained that he was really serious, mimicking Dior's own words. The king bared his teeth, muttering through his teeth that he was a very impudent boy. The hero waited for them to start attacking him. After a few seconds, Dior shouted for all the guards to hear to finish him off. The demons themselves were already eagerly awaiting this order. The entire crowd simultaneously rushed into battle with the goblin. Running away from them, the guy asked the fairy to heal him. But from his pocket, he could hear that she couldn't do it now. Then the hero remembered that in the game, entire raids were assembled to fight Dior, because one player couldn't handle such a crowd of monsters. And the crowd was truly impressive in size, and apparently didn't want to end. But to get to Dior, you need to deal with his soldiers. Lime was alone. But he felt that he had as much strength as an entire raid, and began to use his magic on them. The monsters decided to get to the hero, who was standing on the column, by destroying it. So Lime decided to jump to the next column. However, he didn't take into account that some demons can fly, which is why he could get hit now. One of these demons began to approach the guy. He had already swung his paw at him, but he was unable to strike, as before his eyes the hero evaporated into thin air. Even though the goblin was simply very fast, he was able to jump to another column again. A sufficient number of flying demons had already accumulated behind Lime. Then the guy decided that it was time to use his power on them. He used dark magic, shadow threads, which immediately began to capture the monsters. From the hero, these threads emanated in different directions, towards all the demons. Then he began to spin around, screaming from the pressure of events. He was spinning both himself and the magical threads. He wanted the demons to bite him. The guy is not so easy to whitewash. Afterwards, he put his hand in front of him, sending another wave of his dark power towards his opponents. Everything around lit up from the young goblin's blow. King Dior swore. He looked angry. The guy was satisfied with his work. He was confident in his abilities, so he asked who was next on his way, continuing to send magical blows at the crowd of demons without stopping. One after another, they fell dead to the ground. Although they continued to fight, no one wanted to surrender. But the main character both delivered blows and blocked them very skillfully, without any mistakes. Suddenly he jumped up some distance. He did this to catch one of the demons off guard. He used the dark one, directing it from above onto several large demons. He tried to survive with maximum strength. The monsters stood and waited for the guy to come down to them. But he had plenty of people to fight with at the top too. Jumping from column to column, the guy tried to deliver pinpoint blows to the king's guards. He was under attack from all sides, but so far the hero held his ground. If she didn't come out to fight, he simply tried to dodge the attacks. But there were also moments when his blows were especially painful for his opponents. And in response, the main character could be subjected to similar attacks. The protagonist felt worse and worse with every step he took due to the injury he received from the Demon King at the very beginning. At this point, Dior was laughing at Lime, asking if he was already exhausted. Lime stood in a fighting stance, surrounded by the Demon King's powerful guards. He noted that their battle was likely coming to an end. Dior agreed with him, saying that this was true and adding that he would soon finish off the guy, calling him a damn goblin. The tense confrontation between Lime and the demons continued. Lime explained that he had been deliberately avoiding their attacks, but now the jokes were over. He solemnly announced that the jokes with King Dior were over. Lime concentrated on directing the streams of dark magic to carry out his plan. Then, following a glimmer of light in the pitch darkness, he began a ritual invocation, commanding the force to appear and do his bidding. He stood in the center of a growing magical storm, ready to complete his spell. Lime activated the powerful dark magic technique, Goblin Kinship. His figure was shrouded in swirling darkness, from which a magic circle began to emerge. A swirling darkness thickened around the protagonist. Fiery symbols emerged from it. The magic circle flared up, and a giant, menacing shadow began to materialize from its center. The heroes recoiled in horror when they saw the outline of the summoned monster. The ritual reached its peak, and the outlines of the monster became absolutely clear and tangible. Lime completed the summoning, and the Goblin Kinship technique brought its new Goblin King into the world. Dior did not immediately understand who appeared before him. The Goblin King replied to the Demon King that they had not seen each other for a long time. The heroes stood frozen in stunned silence, looking at the result of the ritual. Lime stood in the center, looking at his calling. The summoned goblin merely shrugged imperturbably, explaining that kings have their servants. The demons shielded themselves from the glow of the Demon King's magic. Everyone continued to look at the lonely goblin in bewilderment, not understanding the essence of what had happened. First one, then another, new goblins began to emerge from the ground. Their numbers began to grow rapidly, filling the space. Soon the small group turned into a whole horde, crowding and noisy. The Demon King didn't understand how the summoned spirit was able to summon someone else, and a bloody massacre began between the army of generals against the entire army of goblins. The king's guards were frightened by the number of goblins summoned, but they continued to fight, despite everything. The pressure in the crowd grew, and the goblins and generals could no longer move freely. As a result, the summoned army turned into a chaotic and uncontrollable mass. Goblins fought in a variety of ways, including using bows and arrows. They skillfully wielded all types of weapons. Their attacks sent the demons flying in all directions. They left no chance for victory for these pathetic opponents. Even those who were several times larger than them were already terrified to fight them. From the crowd came a cry of disbelief and rage from King Deer, outraged by the death of his soldiers at the hands of some goblins. The Goblin King bowed politely and stated that he was glad to help his master. The goblins around him perked up, preparing for new action. Now the Goblin King had completed his mission and was heading back with his servants. Lime approached King Dior, asking him if he was ready for the second round. Now the advantage was on Lime's side, and he was in complete control of the situation. The atmosphere changed to one of tense anticipation for the battle to continue. Lime challenged the enraged Demon King, declaring that the real game was just beginning. Then the large foot landed on the floor, rising from its throne. The majestic and powerful figure of the Demon King appeared, and his voice sounded. He said that he had not killed anyone himself for a long time. Lime, without taking his eyes off him, replied dryly that he would take his words as a compliment. The king continued, stating that it had been a long time since anyone had made her so angry and hateful. Lime felt the overwhelming power of the Demon King, causing the air in the hall to become heavy. His face was distorted with determination, ready for one last, desperate attempt. He was told that his victory was impossible due to the bleeding caused by the curse of Aaron 8. He gathered all his will, deciding to fight until his strength was completely exhausted. Lime looks at his powerful enemy with despair, realizing the complexity of the situation. He prepared for the final battle, raising his weapon, burning with magic above his head. The Demon King struck first, and it was very powerful, but the main character held his ground and was able to parry his attack. Dior smirked and looked at the guy with an arrogant gaze. Suddenly the king began to transform. Something on his head changed, and he himself grew several times. The Demon King gathered a huge magical ball of his power and held it in his hands. Then he knocked her over, already hitting the main character, even though he tried to jump away. He was caught with a scream, and a sword, burning with a red flame, flew out of his mouth. The sword hit the hero right in the hand. It flew so fast that Lime didn't even have time to understand what was happening. Now it will be more difficult for him to hold back the king's attacks. His second hand was pierced through. To his horror, he discovered that the Demon King had not 2, but 4 arms, which was not in line with his previous knowledge. Dior, the Demon King, contemptuously threw him into the gravity cage he had created. Lime found himself in a trap from which, as he realized, there was simply no way to escape. Despair overwhelmed him when he realized that his plans had collapsed, and he was now completely at the mercy of the enemy, especially when an explosion occurred near the cage. When Lime came out of there, the Demon King mockingly expressed surprise that his captive was still alive. Without showing any pain or despair, the boy smiled at the Demon King's face. Lime realized that he had almost no strength left, Dior stated curiously, wondering how much longer Lime could hold out against him. Lime knew the next attack would be decisive, and his strength was at its limit. He concentrated, knowing he had to parry the blow at all costs or he would be finished. Dior waited with an angry look for this little guy to stay. He compressed his already nearly depleted magic reserves to create a defense. His mind was frantically searching for a way out, and his body was preparing for the final effort. His gaze showed a desperate determination to do the impossible. The next moment would determine whether he would survive or fall under the onslaught of the Demon King. The next moment, the guy flew back from another blow from the king. The sword flew out of his hands, and now the main character was temporarily disarmed. Lime fell to the ground, his breathing becoming ragged and heavy. He was breathing heavily, his strength leaving him with every moment. Lime, barely able to stand on his feet, let out only a hoarse, powerless breath. The Demon King asked with mocking surprise what was wrong. Was his opponent really already exhausted? His resistance was almost broken. With cold cruelty, the Demon King declared that he had only just begun, enjoying the helplessness of his victim. The Demon King, with unexpected respect, acknowledged that Lime was a fine warrior who never let his guard down for a second. He noted how he watched his every move and skillfully dodged attacks. As a sign of this respect, he decided to demonstrate the full power of the demon army general. Lime realized with horror what was being said and cursed mentally, realizing that this was that very special technique. He realized that in his current state he simply could not cope with such an attack. The Demon King burst into laughter with the final blow. Lime managed to move away from his blow and then watched Dior. He noted with alarm the incredible power of the Demon King's technique, realizing that such a fire could not be simply extinguished. His fairy companion, breathing heavily, agreed, acknowledging the critical condition. The Demon King dismissively called them annoying gnats, and the fire grew even larger. From this fire the fairy flew to the ground screaming. The Demon King, full of rage, declared his intention to destroy the hero and all his allies. Lime desperately decided that he had to save the fairy, despite the fact that he was at the limit of his strength. He sighed heavily, realizing his powerlessness. He would have at least a little, if he had a little more mana, then everything would have definitely worked out. Suddenly he was interrupted in his thoughts by someone falling on him with a hug. A look of shock and hope crossed his face when he saw Letty in front of him. Soon she came to him with a worried look. She, as if reading his thoughts, asked him directly if he had run out of mana, adding that she had seen everything. The hero asked in surprise what she was doing here, but immediately dismissed the question as unimportant. Now he felt himself in a hopeless situation. Instead, the Dark Elf Princess offered her help with determination. She clearly stated that she would help him deal with Dior, but specified that he would owe her, and used a special technique called energy exchange. The hero, still confused, asked again if this meant that she would collect mana from the surrounding area and transfer it to him. She confirmed this with a serious look. Then, out of helplessness, she began to fall down. A magical connection was established between them, through which a new radiance of energy began to flow. In her last words, "You owe me," someone's name flashed. The hero realized that the Elven Princess's special technique allowed her to draw mana not only from objects, but also from herself. Somewhere on the battlefield, the Demon King threatened that his flames would catch the boy wherever he hid. Meanwhile, a stream of mana from Letty filled the hero with strength. He spoke her name with gratitude, and declared that thanks to her he was now fully recovered, ready to challenge Dior again. The hero declared with renewed vigor that he had everything he needed, and that he was confident that he could kill this tyrant. He sharply concentrated the restored magical energy, directing it to one point. The concentrated energy created a blinding glow around him. The fairy screamed loudly and fell down rapidly. Dior screamed furiously, asking these goblins to finally die. The Demon King's eyes bulged from his own scream. Now he was ready for the decisive counterattack against the Demon King. The king is about to burst into pieces. He tried to resist the pressure of the main character's new tactics. After all this, Lime was ready to admit that the Demon King turned out to be much stronger than his game version. The king's guards lay prostrate on the ground, frozen in horror. Lime looked at all this chaos with a sense of dignity. While the battle was still going on, the poor fairy could not gather her strength and control her own body. Then, when the final blow was dealt to King Dior, it was as if a rain of fire was falling. The fairy fell painfully to the ground and was unable to control herself. She already thought that this would be the end for her. But she realized that she might be saved. Lime approached the goblin fairy, holding the elf princess Letty in her arms, who looked exhausted after the transfer of mana. He turned to her with a smile, saying that someone here needed to restore their mana reserves, and asked if she could help. Lime was very happy when the fairy agreed to help. He was surprised to discover that for defeating King Dior, he received an additional reward: King Dior's sword, a Rondrith. He was delighted, noting that this was a new, unique skill that even his game character seemed to have. He paused in his thoughts, looking at Letty, and realized that if it weren't for her, he wouldn't be alive anymore. Taking the legendary sword he had received, he gratefully told Letty that he had defeated King Dior, and it was all thanks to her. She only quietly noted in response that this was good, feeling either relieved or embarrassed. Letty, still in Lime's arms, was very embarrassed. She began to stutter from excitement and asked to be put in her place. Lime seemed a little surprised, but then he casually put her back in place, causing her to scream in fear. The guy apologized, but the girl replied that it was okay, everything was fine. The girl happily realized that this was not the first time Lime had held her in his arms. The hero called out to the girl when she stood with her back to him. He asked what she was doing here anyway. He then got to the main point, saying that he wanted to thank her from the bottom of his heart. He clearly said that he defeated King Dior thanks to her help and thanked her for it. Letty admitted that she didn't even think that he would seriously attack Dior, and said to herself that with each meeting, she falls in love with him even more. The fairy waited for him to continue, to which the embarrassed Letty replied that that was all she wanted to say. Then he asked Letty again directly why she had come here. Admitting that in truth, she had entered the academy for the same purpose as Lime, she revealed her true mission. She stated that as a princess of the Dark Elves, she had to avenge all her people. I remembered the past, when everyone was whispering that the princess of the Dark Elves herself had actually arrived to enroll at the academy. Letty explained that they were talking about her country, which no longer belonged to them, or rather, had been captured. She added bitterly that the dark elves had now become slaves. The girl told that her father, the ruler of their country, had made a peace treaty with the Demon King. Lime listened to her without interrupting. He promised to recognize our country as independent. However, less than a year later, the Demon King broke this agreement. He invaded their lands with his army. As a result, the Dark Elf King, her father, was put into an induced coma. Letty continued to explain that in order to keep her father alive and safe, the elves swore allegiance to the Demon King. She said that their king ruled the country for many centuries and the people adored him. All this time, she and Lime stood and looked into the distance. Now they couldn't just leave him to die after everything he had done for them. Now, their best magicians in the country are used to pump out the magical energy of their orichalcum. After hearing this terrible story, Lime asked why she had followed him to Diura Castle. Letty, full of determination, replied that for the sake of her people, for the sake of her father, she had made her decision. She explained that she decided to take revenge on the Demon King. She revealed the details of her plan. It consisted of fighting King Deer, defeating him, and taking his sword Arondrith. She explained that this sword was capable of freeing her people. Lime didn't know what to say to this. He just sighed at the situation. The girl paused, realizing that she and Lime had the same goals. The hero smiled at this news. Letty looked at Lime and admitted that he was indeed too strong for a normal goblin. She then added with a smile that whether he was a goblin or not, he was still her hero. Lime, after listening to her, expressed the feeling that there was something fishy about this. He changed the subject by asking who exactly was in power in her country now. She thought about this question for a while, but almost immediately she answered that his name is the Emperor of Dark Souls, Lich. Letty worriedly warned Lime that he was also one of the generals of the Demon King's army. The Lich suddenly appeared before them, and disdainfully stated that he would never have thought that the cruel King Deer would fall to these. Letty asked him very angrily what he was doing there. Then he looked at Lime with cold curiosity, doubting that he was just a goblin, and suggested that he was a mutant. Letty decided not to wait long and strike first. Even though Lime asked Letty to stop, it was too late. Everything around became blue and bright. The demon general continued with a grin, stating that the dark elves, as always, did not impress him in any way. Suddenly he launched a sharp attack in response to Letty. The girl reacted with a frightened exclamation. The protagonist shouted at the enemy that he would not dare harm Letty, her dear friend. The situation immediately escalated, and a counterattack followed from Lime, who was defending her. The situation abruptly shifted to open conflict with a new, powerful enemy. The girl no longer heard anything, only the guy's words. He called her his dear friend. With a cold sneer, Lich offered to make Lime his guinea pig. He no longer paid attention to the girl. The demon general announced that he would start by getting rid of the annoying bugs, hinting at Lime and Letty. Suddenly, behind the main character, Letty fell on her back for no reason. She lay on the cold ground, and it felt like her soul was being sucked out of her chest. The Lich mockingly asked Lime if he hadn't noticed the flow of his mana. He continued sarcastically, saying that it seemed the goblin would have to make a choice about which ending would be better. Lime, facing this new threat, repeated the word choice to himself, knowing that his decision would determine the outcome of this fight. He sarcastically asked Lime what was more valuable to him. The life of the villagers was one of the options. Lime, overcome with anger and despair, furiously shouted the general's name. The girl lay among magical symbols. Another option was Letty's life. He added with brutal precision that they would all die within 30 minutes. The demon general coldly repeated that the lives of all the villagers and the life of this girl were at stake. Then, with sadistic curiosity, he asked Lime whose life he would choose. He concluded with a grin, asking Lime to decide whose life he would save, Goblin. The demon general goaded Lime, urging him to surprise him with his choice. The demon general exclaimed in astonishment as he sensed the abnormal amount of dark mana emanating from Lime. The hero seems to have decided not to submit to the enemy's dilemma, but to find his own, third way. The Lich couldn't fully understand what was happening. A magical, beautiful stone fell to the ground. The young man explained that the face key was created with this magical orichalcum stone, using technology revealed by the veils. However, Lich himself is still alive. Suddenly it was heard that someone called out to Lima. The fairy, full of anxiety, turned to the young man, asking what they should do. He only said the word fairy. She reminded him that the entire village and his sister were in danger. The situation was becoming increasingly complex and multi-layered. The protagonist stood firmly on the ground. He announced that he was going to save everyone. An hour ago in the Goblin village, Miyu said that everything was ready. Lily was very happy when she saw the beautiful strawberry cake. Sister Lima praised the girl. Mia said that because of Mr. Luima, they had fresh berries, so she decided to decorate the cake with them. They were already looking at this cake with hungry eyes. As they began to eat it, they began to wish each other bon appétit. Suddenly Lily looked back. Monsters were visible, slowly moving towards the village. The girls ran outside, covered their mouths with their hands in horror, and whispered the word, nightmare. Miyu was shaking with fear. She didn't know what to do. Lily remembered that her brother had warned her about this. I remembered a scene from the past when Lime was talking to the headman about the problems with clean water. Lily said with a smile on her face that she could cook sweets every day. But that wasn't all they talked about. It was then that her brother told her that the demon who had placed a defiling seal on this land would soon appear in the village. The girls noticed that they had to use the secret passage and help all the villagers escape. This monster moved further and further into the village. The girls found a passage and called all the residents to run here quickly. The demon ran after them, continuing to repeat that they would not leave. Lily realized that she couldn't let him follow the villagers into the portal. She told Mew that she had no other choice, to which the girl asked not to apologize for this. The girl thought that Mr. Lime would have done the same. The demon's footsteps could already be heard behind the girls. He bared his teeth, already seeing their death. It was several times larger, and it seemed like the girls no longer had a chance to escape. The only thing they could count on was the goblin Lime, which is what Lily said. Lime resolutely declared that he would definitely save Letty and Lily using the skills he had acquired. He called loudly for Fedri, the goblin fairy. She asked again, clarifying the plan. The fairy listened attentively to the guy. His actions were aimed at saving his little sister. Fedri firmly said that she understood, confirming her understanding and agreement. The next words were a parting word. There should be no mistake. He relied on the fairy, emphasizing the importance of the upcoming mission. Having prepared for the journey with a confident look, the hero was determined to save Lily. There was chaos all around, but the main character stood there, starting to use his magic. Lime activated his new abilities by using dark magic, a level 58 search technique. Now he could find the target he needed, using his new skills. His consciousness pierced the surrounding area, scanning it. Images emerged of villagers fleeing in panic. Suddenly he spotted the target and pointed in the direction, exclaiming and pointing to the outlines of the girls' figures. Now the way was clear, and the group prepared for action. The concentrated expression on his face showed that he had pinpointed their location. The group encountered a new enemy that emitted an ominous laugh. He blocked their path, claiming that Lily and Mew had blocked it for themselves. Lily ordered Mew to step back, and the girl looked at her with great fear in response. Sister Lime declared that she would defeat the enemy, preparing for battle. The demon turned his attention to Lily with pleasure, noting that this beautiful soul would be perfect for Mr. Ricci's experiments, adding that all this resistance is now useless. It looked like it really was like that. Lily couldn't do anything against this demon. The demon opened his mouth and was ready to attack the girls. Against the backdrop of all this, the village was ablaze. But Lime was already moving at great speed, leaving behind an energy trail. There was very little left, and he would be there. He would be able to save Lily. The light was already visible. A passage straight to her aid. Meanwhile, Lily tried to cover herself with at least her hand from the hopelessness of the situation. She desperately called for her brother's help, ready to burst into tears from fear. Suddenly, a very bright light appeared above the girl's head. Lily was still standing there, covering her face with her hands, not noticing what was happening. Hearing strange sounds, she decided to open her eyes and was surprised by this glow. She peered into it, trying to understand where it came from. Against this backdrop, the second girl became ill and began to fall and lose consciousness. Lily called out to her ally, Mew, who no longer responded to her. Her call was full of fear, sadness, and hope. She repeated and repeated her name again, sitting next to her on the ground. The demon only laughed as he looked at this picture. He was pleased with how events were unfolding. Mew came to her senses briefly, glanced at Lily, and began to quietly thank her. She quietly added something unintelligible before expressing her gratitude for saving her. She said that she had a lot of fun with Lily, while Lily herself looked at the girl with her eyes full of tears. The demon then stated that the girls had simply swapped places, dismissively saying that he didn't like that. The main character's sister turned to him and firmly declared that she would not lose to him. The enemy only responded with a mocking cry, asking her to die quickly. His face looked terrifying as he moved closer and closer to her, repeating this over and over again. The brother they were waiting for appeared, and asked the demon again if he had really told his sister to die. Lime looked at his opponent with hatred. It seemed that with just one glance he was ready to kill him. Tears were already streaming down Lily's cheeks. She was shouting her brother's name with hope. She was very happy to see him. He, turning to his sister and Moo, said, "Ask them to forgive him for the delay." Then his sister said the name of the girl lying unconscious on the ground, pointing at her. The main character asked to rely on him, looking at the frightened Lily sitting in front of him. He began to concentrate his power, chanting words of dark magic, summoning magic, preparing to use a powerful technique. He continued the ritual with words about how they were beyond the light, in the depths of darkness, asking to be given strength. In response to the call, a summoned ally, the goblin healer priest, appeared. The goblin looked around in surprise and asked if something was urgent since she had been called. Seeing the main character Lime, the healer smiled. The hero, without wasting any time, pointed directly at Mew and asked if she could cure her. The goblin healer examined the wounded woman and honestly said that she was not on the brink. However, she added that something could be done and clarified that treatment would require time and a calm environment. Lime, sighing with relief, replied that of course he would take them now. Then the goblin healer began to use her magic to heal the girl. The main character also tried to help this process as much as he could. Seeing that the situation was under control, Lily said with feeling, "Thank God everything is okay," expressing great relief. Lime put his hand to his chest, a smile on his face. He felt that he had done everything he was supposed to. Lily looked at the main character with grateful and admiring eyes. Then she expressed her assumption that perhaps there were still those who needed to be saved. After her words, the girl became thoughtful and looked down. She turned to her brother, and he responded with a question. She repeated, getting his attention, and addressed him, calling him brother. Then she expressed gratitude for saving him, after which her face became serious, and she suggested that he probably had other things to do here. The brother was surprised by his sister's question, and asked how she knew this. The sister said with an understanding smile that after all, she was his little sister. She explained her guess, taking Lime by the hand. After a short silence, she added that there were those who needed his help more. The hero, realizing who she was talking about, seriously pronounced Letty's name. Lime pinpointed Letty's location, clearly pronouncing Richi's castle. There really was a girl here that the main character wanted to save. Her vital energy was flowing out of her chest in a great stream. Opening her eyes, she looked up and said to herself that she didn't know what this place was. Trying to get up, she made a worried sound, a sound of pain and despair. But this beam coming out of her chest did not allow her to move. All she could do now was try to resist him, but it was all to no avail. Her power was absorbed by a demon that hung over the girl. Poor Letty lay on the cold floor, no longer hoping for salvation. The demon looked humbly into the distance, pleased with such actions. The girl, overcome with fear and despair, asked herself the painful question, would she really die here? Meanwhile, Lime confessed to his sister that he really did need to save someone else. Then Lily resolutely asked her brother to leave this place, since he should be somewhere else. However, the hero warned that there were still monsters left here. The guy was surprised when the girl replied that she would take his friends. His sister, full of determination, declared that her brother should rely on her, taking responsibility for protection. At his sister's words to go on his way quickly, he thought for a moment, but he still made up his mind and replied that he would do as she told him. He was ready to trust his sister, saying that he would do everything. Here they are with their sister. They came out into an empty, deserted field, in which Lime began the ritual by casting dark magic. He repeated the dark magic spell, activating the goblin summoning technique. He continued the ritual words, saying that they were beyond the light, in the depths of darkness. Having summoned his goblins, he said that he was not talking about time, but was asking them to save as many as they could. They all answered together that they accepted the order, because this place was not indifferent to them. The goblin leader promised that they would definitely complete the task, to which Lime thanked them. Now he was turning to Lily, saying that he would now go save another friend. Lily replied with anticipation in her voice that she understood everything. Wishing each other luck, they bumped fists and laughed merrily. Noticing the bracelet she had given him on her brother's wrist, the sister smiled sweetly, thinking to herself how good it was that he was still wearing it. The protagonist turned back to the goblin army one last time. He wanted to add one more thing. The next moment he was rushing at high speed along a forest path. He thought that he wouldn't be able to use fast travel until he reached the place where Letty was now. All that was left was to rely on one's own strength. The guy decided to take advantage of his mania, began to move his hand and symbols formed under it. The hero summoned a huge, powerful goblin. He asked him to throw it with all his strength, and he responded positively to the order. The goblin's face grinned with concentration and tension. He wanted to carry out Lime's order. Now, under the power of the huge goblin, the protagonist rushed with even greater speed to help Letty. But he wanted to get there even faster, as soon as possible, so he used more of his strength. Having summoned the goblin dragon, Lime was already sitting on it. The young man swore to himself to save the girl at any cost. Meanwhile, the girl, almost without the strength to even talk, lay in the same place, quietly saying to herself that she would soon be killed. This was the end. The demon lord told her that it was not time yet. It was too early. He was thinking about the main character. He analyzed the situation and observed the confluence of events. Richi watched their progress, building up a sense of doom. Lord Richi was furious when he received news of the defeat of his troops. He couldn't believe that his plans were being ruined by one stubborn creature. Realizing the inevitability of an imminent meeting, the tyrant decided to execute the captive right now, with his own hands. He himself prepared for a personal fight. He bared his teeth and looked straight at Letty with a terrifying and frightening expression. Meanwhile, Lime was racing towards the castle on his dragon at top speed. The protagonist desperately asked if it was possible to fly faster, but it was impossible. Realizing that time was running out, he clenched his teeth in frustration, determined to make it no matter what. He shouted at the goblin dragon to try to fly as fast as he could. In the dungeon, the executioner had already approached Letty. The girl backed away in horror, her silent pleas remaining unanswered. The cold voice promised only a moment of pain before eternal peace. Realizing that there was no hope, she mentally called out to her savior. Lime, somewhere far away, breaking through barriers. In unison hurried fate, feeling its despair. The demon's hand with the weapon raised for the final blow. Letty closed her eyes, hope leaving her. Tears rolled down her eyes without stopping. The girl was saying goodbye to life. Somewhere along the way, her protector realized with horror that he was late. But at the last moment, a miracle happened. The fatal blow never fell, as if an invisible force stopped the executioner. The main character closed his eyes in horror. He tried to think of something, to do something. Letty stared ahead with a glassy gaze, and then a saving storm burst into the throne room with a roar. The light of hope lit up the girl's eyes again when she heard the roar. Lord Ricci listened to them with doubt and anger, not fully understanding the situation. The air shook with fury. The decisive battle began right on the threshold. It was Dandelion who broke into the demon's plans. He immediately attacked the enemy, not giving him time to come to his senses. His sudden appearance completely changed the balance of power. He stood between Letty and the Lord, showing that he was ready to protect the girl. The demon took up his weapon, ready to strike back. But he decided to wait. He wanted to find out who this daredevil was who had made his way straight into his lair. The guy began to approach Ricci closer and closer so that he could take a good look at him. Short and collected, he gave his name, Lute, the Dark Knight of Arcadia. He addressed the owner of the castle with feigned respect, but there was a hint of steel in his tone. After Dandelion, as if making an important clarification for everyone, introduced himself as Lime's best friend. The demon looked at him thoughtfully. The fair-haired guy did not take his eyes off him. He looked straight into the enemy's eyes. He asked him to lend him his life. Half an hour ago, the goblin was preparing his appearance, negotiating with the fairy, explaining the complex plan of movement. He gave precise instructions and activated the spell, stepping from the past into the most critical moment of the present. Lime responded by shouting at the goblin fairy that she should stay there, in Sile's dorm, and tell the guy something. She spelled out what the fairy was supposed to say. She asked again in surprise, just say to become his ally and that's all. The goblin claimed that everything was right and he should understand him. The fairy understood her task, but it seems that was not all. The guy asked her to give the weapon to Liutik, saying that there should be no mistake. He relied on her very much. Now, in the throne room, the Lord repeated the name of the fair-haired hero, thinking about everything that was happening. Lute repeated his strange request to Ricci, which was apparently part of his magical ritual. The demon felt Dandelion's power on himself, causing him to stagger a little in place. Suddenly a light appeared similar to that from the appearance of Buttercup. Ricci turned around, not yet expecting guests to come to his lair. It was a goblin dragon, along with its summoner, the main character. At that very moment, the protagonist, finally seeing Letty safe and sound, could not hold back a sigh of relief. Letty also looked at the guy who appeared with joy on her face. Lute noted with a slight mockery the speed with which his friend had broken through here, and he added, muttering, that he was going to deal with Ricci alone. Goblin Lime suggested acting together. His comrade, his best friend, readily agreed. The conversation was interrupted by an outburst of rage from the Lord, who accused them of being presumptuous. To this, Lute coldly replied that they should be the ones to say this, and threw the accusation of destroying an entire empire in the tyrant's face. The protagonist added a stream of accusations about curses on Letty, who was still tormented, the suffering of innocents, and the incitement of monsters. Every word hit the mark, as if trying to be emotionless. The guy spoke these facts. He spoke for everyone, for her sister, her friends, that the demon had cast dirty magic on the goblins. He repeated once again how he began to set these terrible monsters on everyone. The climax was a rhetorical question about whether such a criminal could count on anyone's respect. Ricci only snorted in response, calling them lesser creatures, and vowed to destroy them all. His arrogance only emphasized his guilt. The Lord decided to use his power and apply the wild dance, his dark magic. He shouted loudly at all his opponents, trying to instill his fear in them. Letty was so impressed by this that she screamed out in fear. The protagonist rushed forward with a loud cry, calling on his comrade to cleanse the world of this darkness. Lute responded with a short yes. They were ready to go ahead. They felt that they could defeat this demon now. However, Ricci was also quick to issue challenges and activate his techniques. The throne room became the epicenter of a magical and physical clash. The two friends attacked in unison, their movements fast and deadly. Letty just watched these events quietly, admiring the guy's strength. The loud roar of one monster mingled with the ringing of Dandelion and Lime's blades. The enemies, caught off guard by such coordination, barely had time to react. One of them only managed to make a short sound of surprise before Dandelion's crushing blow fell upon him. The opponents tried to strike back, but the boys parried them with incredible dexterity, unleashing a hail of attacks of their own in response. The Dark Lord, cold and focused, methodically and inexorably brought their common victory closer. The demon exhaled hoarsely, realizing that it would not be easy to defeat these guys. The boys tried to catch Ricci off guard. Dandelion moved with incredible speed, all the while watching their main enemy closely. Lime also kept pace with his ally, preparing for a joint attack with his best friend. Shouting the word "get it" in unison, they focused on the demon lord Ricci. Their combined strike created an explosion of powerful energy that could not help but surprise their opponent. After a furious attack by the allies, the enemy seemed to have been defeated, and Dandelion ran with interest to see what was left behind, even though all that was visible ahead was emptiness. However, the boy realized with anger and disappointment that the victory was incomplete. He came to this conclusion after looking at his fake remains. Lute struck the remains of his enemy with force and screamed, demanding to know where his real main body was. It turned out that they had only destroyed part of the demon's body. After Ricci added that they would never defeat him like that, the blonde looked at him thoughtfully. The enemy continued to taunt, claiming that for now, he was hiding his presence and attacking from a blind spot. He called for them to die in his terribly hoarse voice. Suddenly, the demon became interested, as if something had changed, as if someone was missing. The essence of King Ricci's technique is to hide and attack. Moreover, this technique is used randomly. However, he added, the enemy can activate the space coverage technique in advance. After this, it will be possible to find the real body. Lime understood and knew all his techniques. He was ready for them. Lord Ricci looked questioningly at the protagonist, repeating several times only one word, that. Lime explained to the others that their previous attacks had served a vital purpose in forcing the enemy to reveal themselves. The hero coldly stated that he now knew all of his opponent's techniques. He noted that it was good that he was susceptible to their attacks. The enemy was incapable of change even in the changed circumstances, remaining in essence a helpless creature. The goblin desperately demanded that the demon stop. His voice was filled with rage for the fate of his people, the evil elves, and for his dead friends. He swore to destroy the enemy, putting all his accumulated feelings into this oath. His determination was absolute. He cut the air into several pieces with his power, and he aimed further, moving at high speed. Ricci was about to be struck by the boy's magic. After a while, the demon Ricci admitted that he had indeed been struck. However, he interrupted his thought. It seemed the Lord had completed his analysis. He was surprised to admit that Lime was a creature summoned by the goblin goddess from another world. But then he concluded that Lime wasn't even a demon in the usual sense. He had already sent the results of this analysis to his superior, King Hermes. Buttercup triumphantly declared that they had finally succeeded, but she asked again with alarm if Lime had heard him. The main character thought that the king would finally find out about him. He seemed to accept this revelation calmly, noting that sooner or later it was bound to happen, but he still clenched his fist in tension. But he added that things would get more difficult, and Liut, standing in his background, waited for his friend to come out of his thoughts. Having thought about all this, the guys returned to Letty and tried to help her as best they could. The girl seemed to be simply sleeping now, not thinking about anything. Letty woke up clearly worried. She made an exhausted sound. She stood up to see what was happening. She still didn't fully understand everything that was happening. The protagonist approached her and calmly explained that the curse had just lifted, so she had not yet fully recovered. Letty called out the protagonist's name, and there was alarm in her voice. He gently suggested that she rest a little longer until her strength was restored. The princess, still weakened, looked at the chief with gratitude. She thought that he had saved her. Then the girl recalled that she was once the strongest knight and saved hundreds of lives herself. But ever since she met him, she constantly needed his help and she felt weak. The dark-haired hero gently objected to her. He said that this was not true and that they had always been equals. His words were meant to encourage her and remind her of her own strength. The protagonist's words had an effect. Lime reminded her that they were friends. The girl, as if waking up, agreed and thanked him with a smile. Her peace of mind returned. She stated that everything was fine now and it was time to move on. However, at that moment she let out a short cry and began to fall. The princess was caught by the protagonist, apologizing for her weakness, but the protagonist immediately stopped her, saying that it was okay. She tried to explain something, but she got confused in her words and was surprised at what she was saying. She wanted to tell him that he had always been more important to her, what she always felt for him. But suddenly a strange feeling came over her. She thought it was still too early, but she couldn't stop. It seemed as if something or someone was influencing her mind or body against her will. At that moment, Lute and the fairy apologized for interfering, and the situation changed dramatically, entering a new, dangerous phase. Lute suddenly turned to the main character and offered to introduce him, but the fairy reproachfully said that she was completely ignoring the savior. Lime and Letty flew off in different directions at lightning speed, while chattering something like words of apology. The protagonist apologized to his team when Lute admitted that he had tried hard. Letty, having run off into a corner somewhere, asked herself in surprise when she had become like this. Then Lime's tone suddenly changed to joyful. He declared that he wanted to invite Buttercup to the party. He also expressed a desire to introduce his best friend to his younger sister. Lime put his hand on the guy's shoulder, saying that they were comrades in battle. From these words, Arcades Buttercup's eyes sparkled with a bright light of happiness and tenderness. Now their team was ready to return back to rest after all these trials. Now they were already approaching the hidden territory of the goblins. This village was in full swing of life. The goblins were busy with their own affairs. Some mourned their dead relatives, holding flowers in their hands and bowing their heads. The first rays of the warm sun fell on the glass window of the building, shimmering in bright colors. The girl summoned by Lime stood over the girl's bed and tried to help her. Suddenly she opened her eyes and stared at one point for a few more seconds. Realizing what was happening, her friend, the main character's sister Lily, immediately ran up to her and joyfully shouted her name. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes when the girl finally woke up. The girl who saved Mayu said very joyfully, "The girl woke up, she's okay." She added that consciousness had also returned, so now it was only a matter of time for her to recover. Lily was no longer embarrassed. Tears of happiness flowed down her cheeks. She thanked God for such a miracle. Finally, before disappearing, the goddess gave the girls advice to take care of themselves. Mew, already full of desire for life, looked at Lily. They held hands. The girl began to laugh. She was very glad that she was alive. Lily happily confirmed that her brother was the savior. The rescued girl muttered the name of her savior, Lime. She noticed that this man always helps her out. Suddenly, there was an insistent knock on the door. Lily opened it and asked who was there. She stood holding her breath, staring at those who had come. After all, it was her brother who joyfully greeted his sister. The girl, when she realized who was standing in front of her, pressed her head against Lima's neck so that it seemed she could strangle him. Having peeled herself away from him, she immediately began to squeal, telling her brother to look at how much she had prepared. The table was indeed filled with a variety of food, drinks, and snacks. Everyone's eyes were almost popping out of their heads, and their jaws were hanging open from hunger. In one voice, they began to shout that they were ready to start this holiday of theirs. It was already getting dark outside, but this did not stop the team of friends from starting their feast. The young man with a short blonde haircut introduced himself as a student at the Dark Knight Academy named Luke. He quickly bowed out, adding that he and Lime were on good terms. Lily politely thanked everyone for looking after her brother. The embarrassed protagonist commented that it all reminded him of a son-in-law's visit to the bride's parents. The cheerful girl introduced herself as Letty, also a student at the Dark Knight Academy. Then she added that she was Lime's friend, catching herself thinking that she had almost said that she was his dear friend. The turquoise-haired girl introduced herself as Mew and said that Lime had saved her life. The purple-haired girl introduced herself as Lily, the protagonist's younger sister, and expressed her joy that her brother now had more friends. Letty immediately thought about it, comparing the girl to someone else, and noting that Mew was not his sister. She saw these girls for the first time when she was following the main character in the past. Then she was very surprised and it seems became jealous of the guy, seeing the girls next to him. The protagonist's sister mentally recognized her relationship with him and said that she believed her brother was related to them. At the same time, the guys had already taken glasses in their hands and were getting ready for the main event of the evening. Everyone understood the main character's train of thought, raised their glasses and, together with the fairy, shouted the word, "Let's drink." After some time, all the plates were empty. Now the boys had hot cups of pleasant drinks in their hands. Lime switched over and got down to business. He noted with concern that Dandelion insisted on a speedy meeting with the Demon King to resolve all the problems, and added that he wanted to resolve everything peacefully. The protagonist explained that first the Elven Empire of Evil needed to be liberated. Letty was surprised by these words, and asked again if Lime would really help. He confidently replied that of course he would help, noting that now it was not Ricci, and it would be easy to do. Buttercup also said with an encouraging look that he could help. The girl looked at them gratefully and said, "Thank you," from the bottom of her heart. Lime quietly asked his sister Lily to stay here a little longer, to which the girl responded positively, and said that her brother could do whatever he considered necessary. The main character sincerely thanked Lily with a smile on his face. The girls, Lily and Letty, looked at each other and laughed. The hero looked at his reflection in the mug of tea and thought that once he freed the elves, things would only get more serious. Now the path lay to the dark castle of the Demon King Hermes. From this castle, the main character, Lime, was now being watched from a magic ball. It was a man with long hair. He bared his teeth. His pupils glowed red. He was a creature from another world, very large in size with horns on his head. He looked at the guy and noted that he was very interesting. Meanwhile, the company was in the Elven Empire of Evil. The protagonist's foot stood near the edge of the abyss. Beside him, looking down, stood his friends, Letty and Buttercup. Lime looked at this whole view for a few minutes and thought about his future. The entrance to the Elven Empire was guarded by 2 guards. Inside, people were bustling about, each one busy with their own concerns. The guard told the townsman how to work, while insulting him in every possible way. He himself could calmly have a snack and rest, but he did not give his subordinates such freedom of action. Letty looked at all this and stated that nothing had changed here. Asked the guys to wait a little. She promised to free everyone. The hero said that now the commander in the person of Ricci is not there. Everyone inside must be involved. If they go in, then only now. Lute noticed that the problem was still in this gate. Realizing that the girl must know how to get in, he asked her. Lime stood there and thought that such a good outcome simply could not happen. Then the smile on the guy's face shone again. He suggested going head-on. Then he asked Letty to be patient for a little while, and she looked at him questioningly. Everyone looked at the main gate together, thinking about the guy's plan. Suddenly, they heard clattering footsteps next to them. The two guards became wary, peering at the approaching figure. A beautiful lady appeared before them, followed by a captive, who was accompanied by two guys. Naturally, they weren't going to let them in so easily without questions. When asked who this girl was, she changed the subject, answering that she had caught two escaped elves and had come to report. Letty stood hunched over as if she were actually caught. The guards sweated when they realized that the escaped elf was a princess. The girl said that it was true. She found out about her antics and went to look for her on her own. She leaned on her shoulder and, with a smile, showed them that the girl did not have a single scratch. She was just waiting for the appropriate payment. They called the princess a devil, then pointed their finger in the direction and ordered her to head towards the castle. Having gone inside and taken cover, the boys began to take off this masquerade. The main character was glad that everything worked out, and then immediately asked Letty for forgiveness for having to do this. She replied that the main thing was that they were able to do it, but noted that he was still strange for coming up with such a thing. The fairy, having transformed back into her usual form, confirmed her words. Liut laughed at the whole situation and asked what to do next. Covering her face with a hood, Letty replied that she would now contact her people. This magnificent trio walked past the shops and strolling elves. Some elves did not walk at all, but rather went out for a walk, like dogs. The guy clearly didn't like it and asked what was there. The girl sadly told how elves who possess magic are sent to the mines, and there they are kept forcibly like slaves. Buttercup remarked with undisguised sadness that this was too cruel. The fairy decided to add that the same thing happened with the goblins. The protagonist listened to the words of his company, and did not yet know what to answer. So they silently reached the place they needed, where Letty had led them. She touched the rocky wall with her fragile hand. Then she read the spell in a language only she could understand. A beautiful stone magically appeared from the wall, giving off a blue glow. A secret passage opened underneath it to where the group needed to get to. Now Letty commanded their little group and ordered them to follow her. Everyone obediently followed the order and followed each other. They quickly reached the right door. All that remained was to figure out what to do next. The girl was very happy. She looked at everything with enthusiasm, with her blue eyes. Especially the man sitting behind that door was very surprised to see the princess here. The man couldn't believe his eyes. How could she remain intact? She replied that she was also very glad because he, Elrond, was safe. But she corrected him, shaking her finger, that she was not a princess at all, but a knight, but a man. Replied that it suited her, addressing her as you. He still didn't understand how she came back, since he heard that she was in Dial. Letty confirmed his words, but without further details asked him to gather everyone. Elrond quickly carried out Princess Letty's order. The group decided to show the others the sword they had taken with them, and placed it on the table. The elves looked at him in surprise. They recognized him as that cursed sword. The girl pointed her hand at her companion, Lime, and said that it was his doing. Elrond called the guy an ordinary goblin, not believing Letty's words. The girl got angry at this, asked him not to say that, because the guy saved her life. Lime heard Letty defend him and chuckled quietly on the sidelines. Then Elrond, frightened by such a reaction from the princess, decided to apologize, while bowing. The protagonist replied that there was nothing wrong with that, and the man then cleared his throat, feeling awkward. He stood over the damn sword, thinking about how cool this thing was. After all, with his help they will even be able to free the mistress and finally rise up. Having voiced his guess, he raised his fist up, and the crowd of elves came to life. Letty decided to explain to her friends that her father was cursed by the Dark Knight Lencia. He is called a great magician because his dark magic is terrifying. The hero, having heard this, decided that he needed to defeat him. Elrond frowned and called Lencius a traitor. Lime realized that the man had a personal grudge against him. He said out loud that now, when Ricci was gone, he needed to defeat this Lencius. Elrond was surprised by the guy's words. He asked again how come Ricci wasn't there. When the goblin Lime replied that he had defeated him, all the elves shuddered in horror. But afterward, the guy added that it would be more accurate to say that he and Dandelion defeated him together. Letty said proudly that she had already said that Lime was no ordinary goblin. The elves began to discuss if he was with them. Then somehow everything would work out. The guy looked at their joyful cries with a grin, and suddenly someone called out to him. It was Letty. She was scratching her arm with excitement. She wanted to ask if he could do something. Specifically, whether he could become the savior of this country. That was her request. The protagonist answered without a doubt that it would be over, and added that this was why he came here. The girl listened to him without interrupting, not knowing what words of gratitude to choose. The hero turned to Elrond and asked for more information. He needed to come up with a plan. The next time, the guy looked at the map, which the man explained to him, showing everything on it with his hand. Afterwards, for convenience, they decided to put the map on the table and arrange the figures on it. Elrond, having heard the plan, was surprised that such a thing was really possible, to which the princess replied that for Lime, nothing was impossible. Buttercup commented on this, saying that she had more confidence than the guy himself. Believing the girl's words, the man replied that she and the elves would become his strength. Elrond explained that they have a meritocracy, they obey those who are stronger. Letty looked at all this and was happy for her friend. A group of elves formed in front of Lime, letting him know that he was now the leader. The main character looked at everyone thoughtfully. He felt responsible. A goblin fairy flew up to Elrond and asked him to give her a map, which he answered positively. Suddenly, a man's scream echoed throughout the room, signaling the need to prepare. The plan would go into effect in 2 days. The fairy hesitated a little, so she announced that she would go and have a look around. At this time, Lime was saying goodnight to Liut, who told him that it was never boring with the guy. Heading to his bed, he threw in one last thought. He didn't think that there was such an interesting person in the academy. The hero told him to be careful, otherwise he too could become an enemy. But Liut replied that he still had to help his friend, and he knew about the circumstances. Lime, while his friend was talking, was thinking that Liut was a kobold. The blonde added that he didn't know what would happen next, but he decided that he would follow him. The guy answered mockingly, "It's not for nothing that Liut is a dark knight." After laughing a little, they both went to bed. Suddenly, for some reason, the hero jumped out of bed. Letty stood shyly at the entrance to his room, wrapped in a blanket. The guy was surprised to see her here and asked what happened at such a time. While making up the bed, the girl asked if she could talk a little. Not quite understanding what the girl wanted from him, Lime agreed to talk. For a few seconds, they just sat on the edge of his bed in silence. The main character was thinking at this time that he shouldn't have let the fairy go. Now he was alone in the same room with the girl in the middle of the night. Suddenly, the girl plucked up her courage and called the Lime by name, which scared him. She said with a serious expression that she wanted to tell him something. She began to tell about Lenzia. He was a very talented elf, a magician who invented various spells, but very ambitious. Letty continued, saying that one day he left the country, and when he returned, he was their enemy. Elrond's words immediately came to mind when he said that this man was their enemy. Then the hero clarified that he was trying to rule their country, and the girl replied that she thought so. Lime thought that Lenzia had already been talked about as the next ruler, and said that it seemed there was another side to the coin. An inspiration came to the guy's head. He assumed that this meant the next ruler would be connected to Letty. The girl nodded positively and said that she was his fiancée. She explained that if this disgrace continued, she would have to do it. The hero understood that this was why she fled the country. Now both of them didn't know what to say about this situation. It seemed like so much could be explained to each other now, but no one dared. Lime extended his hand towards the girl, a little nervously. Letty looked at the hero with tears in her eyes and trembling in her soul. She extended her hand to him in response. The guy put it in his. Then Letty quietly asked, saying only his name questioningly. She could no longer say anything else. Her hand trembled in the protagonist's hands. Lime told her not to worry. He wouldn't let this happen. The girl only asked if it was true. He confirmed his words and confidently added that he could protect her. I thought to myself that this was the shortest way to liberate the country. Tears of happiness began to flow from her eyes and she couldn't stop them. She threw herself into his arms, saying his name. Crying into his shirt, the girl thanked the guy. She said that she was a knight, so she believed that she had to give it her all. But there were times when it became scary. The young man gently praised Letty for her dedicated efforts. While the guy was patting the girl on the head, she was holding on tightly to his shirt. When Letty called the hero by name again, he looked at her questioningly and waited for the question. The princess spoke thoughtfully about the possibility of terminating the marriage contract with Lenzia if their plan was successful, but cut the thought short. The young man asked again, not immediately understanding the meaning of her words. A fairy appeared and cleared her throat loudly, decisively drawing everyone's attention to herself. The fairy straightened up, her tone becoming firm and businesslike as she announced that she had done some work and required attention. The boys had recently been very close to each other, but quickly drifted apart with the arrival of the fairy. Afterwards, the fairy gently but persistently suggested postponing personal matters until the moment when their main business would be successfully completed. The tiny fairy, hovering in the air, commented with a chuckle that she had returned just in time for everyone to start cooing. She was clearly tired of the emotional upheaval, waved her hand and declared that she didn't care, and that she wanted to sleep. Letty and Lime stood there for a while, confused and not knowing what to do next. In Ruelf Castle, some important person sat relaxed on a throne. He tapped softly on the table, thinking about the situation. The same voice noted with cold calculation that this little fairy, like an annoying midge, was watching their every step. He continued, according to the information received, it was the elves who brought the princess to the castle, but nothing is known about their subsequent fate. Based on this, he concluded that the guards and everyone else had simply been deceived. He rose from his place and gave a merciless order, decreeing that all the rebels must be destroyed. The smug villain announced that he, and no one else, would become the new ruler of this country. Lanisha, looking at his ball, slowly and with special significance said that Letty belonged to him. The next day, 3 friends were walking on the street among the flowers. Among these flowers stood Letty, who was stealthily looking at Lime. The hero briefly confirmed that the goods had been purchased and thanked his informant. The protagonist's friend asked him in bewilderment what he was going to do with the acquired item. The young man explained that by defeating Ricci, he unlocked a new skill called Level 6 Guide. He added that with this new skill he would be able to accomplish something important for the rebels. The protagonist picked a bunch of flowers and walked, getting ready to demonstrate his strength. He stopped in place and concentrated on himself inside. The magic began after the words of the hero of dark synthesis were spoken. Rays of dark energy stretched upwards towards the sky from the protagonist's hands. Suddenly, a gorgeous dress appeared before the boy's eyes. The princess was truly delighted when she saw the elegant dress provided to her. Dandelion, standing nearby, was increasingly surprised by his friend's skills. Lime noted that the dress not only looks great, but also, thanks to magic, is extra durable and comfortable. The hero explained that the fabric was fire-resistant, and promised to make similar equipment for the rest of the group. He stated that by wearing these costumes, they would be able to enter Rulf Castle and take part in the upcoming ball. With determination in his voice, he repeated the plan. They would go to the ball, defeat Lencia, and force him to reveal the location of Letty's father. The following evening, at the walls of the gloomy castle of Ruelf, everyone was preparing for the upcoming event. The smallest girl in the group was already ready for it. Buttercup also quickly transformed himself for the ball. Letty looked ahead with a little anxiety. She was wearing that same dress. Lime was looking forward to this long-awaited meeting with Lencia. He looked resolutely to the future and was determined to win. After a short period of time, the whole team gathered at the ball. Letty whispered to her companions that Elrond's men were waiting for their signal and were ready to act as soon as they found Letty's father. Lime briefly confirmed that he understood the plan and gave the command to move forward. The group of friends began to move, making their way through the crowd of dancers. Joyful shouts from those present at the ball could be heard all around. Also the laughter of those who have just arrived here. The guys were looking for what they came here for. Lime looked around the room questioningly, wondering out loud where Lencia could be hiding in this crowd of people. The girls confirmed his words, looking around. Dandelion quietly agreed, admitting that it was indeed more difficult to find a target while wearing masks. Someone greeted the strangers politely but warily, noting that he was seeing them for the first time. He continued his questioning, noting that the guests did not look like the Demon King's soldiers, and that trust in strangers had fallen sharply lately. The protagonist, acting as a representative, calmly replied that they had an official invitation. The girl, dressed very expensively, began to whisper to her guard. Smiling into the guy's eyes, she said that she wanted to check them out. How well suited is their whole group for this event? Having assessed their appearance, he admitted that they fit perfectly into the event and looked impeccable. Letty quietly admitted that even she found it difficult to grasp the meaning of the arrogant speech of the aristocrat who stopped them. He explained that he had to act quietly so as not to attract unnecessary attention or make any noise. The hero, smiling, asked the others to rely on him, promising to give a worthy answer to the haughty aristocrat. He continued his thought, emphasizing once again that it was important to do everything as discreetly as possible. He continued to pull the mask over the seed, because that was the rules of the ball. The man mockingly apologized for using complex language and suggested switching to a modern, understandable language. The hero pointed out that the lady had just insulted them. Lime claimed that he understood the language better than his interlocutor. Therefore, having concluded that they were not even from the capital, he asked with even greater disdain how they dared to behave so arrogantly. At that moment, the girl only quietly exhaled, watching the heated argument. Lime began his speech, urging his interlocutor to listen carefully. He stated that the true value of an aristocrat is determined not by the size of his possessions, but by how he manages them. He continued, politely but firmly asking them to leave the room if they had learned their lesson. The stunned aristocrat could only let out an indignant cry, unable to find a worthy answer. Buttercup calmly confirmed that they would not let this go, but they were not going to let the incident go unanswered. Lime repeated his thought while the man stood there, unsure of what to do, making it clear that the conflict was not over. Realizing that nothing could be done, the aristocrat and her companion finally replied as they ran away that they had remembered it. Letty suddenly asked in amazement how Lime knew so well the ancient language, which even the imperial family did not speak perfectly. Lime, smiling slightly, agreed that he had to cheat a little to get out of this situation. He explained that they had this opportunity thanks to the goblin's skills. Lime explained that he used a skill that allowed him to mentally summon a goblin professor, a rare and highly intelligent species. Thanks to this, he was able to absorb the goblin's knowledge and speak the ancient elven language fluently, which allowed him to respond with dignity to the insulting aristocrat. He confirmed with admiration that the plan had worked, and they had indeed been able to outsmart their opponents. Letty said he did the right thing by cheating. The other guests, who witnessed this verbal duel, began to excitedly discuss what had happened. They admitted that everyone had seen the humiliation of the haughty aristocrat. Someone in the crowd commented that these particular aristocrats were very unpleasant individuals. Another girl happily declared that since the heroes had dealt with them, they were now their fans. The girls confirmed that one way or another, everyone disliked them. At this moment, one of the ladies present, smiling, asked what their hero's name was. The two guys introduced themselves, a little afraid of such a crowd. All the girls around started admiring their names. The ladies continued to vie with each other to invite Lime and Liu to dance. praising their excellent manners. Letty, watching the ladies surround Lime, whispered with slight jealousy that it was she who gave him this name. The fairy, who didn't look her usual self today, came up to Letty to support her and asked what she would do. Heavy footsteps were heard from the other side of the room. An aristocratically dressed man walked along, with complete self-confidence. He even seemed to emit a special magical glow, the commander-in-chief of the occupation army, the Dark Mage Knight. At that moment, Letty whispered the name of her long-awaited target, Lencia. Lime also noticed this person and became wary. The crowd greeted him with enthusiastic cries of praise for his magnificence. One of the guests added that it was a great honor for them to be present at the ball with such a person. Lencia continued his speech, announcing that he wanted to show something special at tonight's ball. The crowd was still cheering Lencia, thanking him for the evening. The speaker proudly presented to the audience an elegant statuette made of precious orichalcum. He continued his speech by stating that their active work brings them closer to success every day. However, immediately changing his tone to triumphant, he promised that he would give all profits from the sale of such products to his loyal supporters. Then Letty thought to herself that this beautiful item was created through the backbreaking labor of enslaved elves. The results of their work will be received only by the highest ranks of the army and some members of the aristocracy. Lencia paused dramatically, as if he had suddenly remembered something, feigning slight confusion. Then a broad smile lit up his face, and he solemnly announced the beginning of the festive evening. He thought for a moment, as if choosing the right words, and repeated the key phrase to himself. But then his expression changed to a serious one, and he asked those gathered for a little more attention. Lencia explained that the choice of the date of the ball was not random, as a spy in the form of a tiny fairy had been discovered in their domain. Buttercup quietly told Lime about her bad feeling, believing that they had been discovered. Lencia continued his speech, hinting that enemies were already among the guests present. His gaze suddenly pointed to the place where the heroes stood. He also pointed with his hand to the place where the group with the main character stood. Lime realized that he couldn't escape unnoticed now, and thought about what to do. Someone's sharp order forbade them to move, declaring that their plan had completely failed. The hero was already about to use his power. It was already concentrating in his hand. One of the soldiers seemed to be about to act, but Lencia stopped him. Letty looked at this main culprit of the ball with fear in her eyes. Lime asked again, a battle with an oath. The girl explained that this is an ancient tradition among elves, where the loser is obliged to fulfill the wish of the winner. She added that this is a kind of oath that cannot be broken. Letty whispered in horror that the situation had become too dangerous, and they needed to act faster. Lencia mockingly praised Letty for her knowledge of elven traditions. He then solemnly announced the name of one of the participants in the upcoming duel, Princess Tiara Letty. Letty realized with alarm what this phrase meant. She was recognized, feeling the growing danger. Lencia added that if she did not accept the challenge, he did not know what would happen to the rebels. She recalled Elrond's words, anxiously not understanding how this had happened. The main character replied that if he wins, he will tell him his secrets, because he has interesting abilities. Lime learned about this from Ricci, and Letty's tiara will marry Lencia, and he will become the ruler of this country. The girl listened to all this with great fear. She didn't like this option. The hero, confirming the words that Letty had recently spoken, took off his mask. He repeated these words again, said that he would protect her. He accepted the challenge. Everyone had already gathered to watch this battle at Ruelf Castle. Lime stood in anticipation, preparing for the fight. His opponent watched him with a smirk, not expecting anything unusual from the guy. The observers kept coming and coming. They rejoiced at this outcome of events. So far, only his comrades were on the main character's side, and they firmly believed in his victory. Someone from the crowd expressed admiration for Lencia's strength, wondering about the other guy. Lime watched as Lencia's magical power increased several times. He analyzed the situation, realizing that this opponent did not exist in the game he came from, and was the same as the hero. Then Lime decided to start. He used a level 39 fireball. At this moment, someone present noted with amazement that this was magic that exceeded the 50th level. Lime decided internally that they needed to break through and concentrated. He thought about using the acceleration skill, but he suddenly realized that everything was happening too fast. The protagonist looked at the energy rushing towards him in horror, cursing silently. A moment later, there was a powerful explosion. Seeing this, Letty, with a tear on her cheek from fear, screamed out the name of the main character. His best friend Dandelion did the same, straining his voice. But the hero was able to stay on his feet even after such an attack. Although he did not succeed in this easily, he realized that Lencia's magic was different from his. He mixed it with the magic of the elves. Then the enemy decided to use the 43rd level abyss. Lime didn't immediately understand what was happening. He was standing in the center of his opponent's magic. Thinking about his situation while standing, he realized something strange. He felt worse and worse. Lencia spoke, asking the hero, "Come on," using pressure of the 53rd level. The guy couldn't control himself and resist. His strength didn't obey him. Once again, the hero felt the enemy's attack on himself. He missed it. Falling to his knees, he stood there for a while. wondering why he couldn't control his body. Lencia smiled at the fallen boy, using his power again, level 42 acid. The main character couldn't do anything yet. He just covered himself from his opponent's next blows. He tried to simply crawl forward towards Lencia, while Letty watched him and worried. Afterwards, Lime realized that he could at least use a barrier. This way he could protect himself, catch his breath a little, and recover from his defeats. Lencia, holding a magic rod in her hands, directed Hellish Flame, already at level 56, at the guy. But the main character was able to jump back this time and was almost unharmed, realizing that his opponent was too fast. Lencia couldn't calm down and mocked Lime, calling him a lowly, talentless creature. To which the completely rumpled guy, with a smile on his face, replied that this was all just the beginning. Then the opponent started making fun of him, saying that he hadn't been able to hurt him yet, and the hero asked him to try to keep quiet. And while Lime still didn't know how to win, Lencia replied that he would easily finish him off. The hero's gaze caught the statuette, which was glowing with a green light. A new plan for victory suddenly began to form in his head. But suddenly, Lencia began to launch level 50 ice, feeling superior. At the same time, using flames of the 50th level as well. The hero looked at this with undisguised horror, he thought. How is this possible now at the same time? Lencia himself, with animal passion, told the guy to get magic, which generally comes out to level 100. Lime, stunned by the attack, raised his head with an expression of confusion and cursed, realizing the power of his opponent. At the last moment, his eyes opened as wide as possible in fear for his life. Afterwards, the main character again found himself in a borderline state. When he woke up here, he didn't understand where he was. He heard a remark that was aimed directly at him. The smug goblin goddess accused him of relaxing. At that critical moment, Lime admired the goblin goddess, a girl with graceful horns, finally realizing that he was in space. With determination in her voice, she declared that she would not let them lose now, and ordered them to stop bickering and focus on winning. She turned to Lime, explaining that he needed to stop playing and that he needed to defeat his opponent. Lime replied that he had exhausted himself due to poor health. Suddenly it dawned on him that this artifact was somehow influencing him and the space around him. The goblin goddess confirmed his guess, saying that she was now sure of it herself. The hero explained that these techniques of using two techniques simultaneously were also somehow connected with orichalcum. With a slight smile, she noticed that Lime had grown. The protagonist immediately asked if she expected praise for this. The goddess replied that no way, but then corrected herself, saying that only this time. She then added that she appeared before him because people began to believe in her again, and this opportunity itself appeared thanks to the heroes, so she asked to continue in the same spirit. Lime, surprised by such words, replied that of course he would try. The goblin goddess demanded that the boy do what he had to do and stop interfering. The hero opened his eyes in a concentrated effort, calling upon his powers. But the combined attack still managed to defeat the goblin Lime. Lime's face reflected a storm of emotions, determination, rage, and despair. He shouted that he did not dare lose here and now. Lencia raised his head with an expression of utter astonishment, realizing his intention. The hero thought to himself that he was the savior, as the goblin goddess had told him. The enemy asked Lime how he felt after this. These words were followed by another powerful attack, which left the main character once again on his knees on the cold ground, groaning in pain. In response, Lencia showed his snow-white teeth. He was pleased with himself. The protagonist's comrades were very scared for him and began to shout his name louder and louder. And although they tried to persuade him to give up, Lime replied that everything was fine. Lime looked around in confusion, trying to guess where the next blow would come from. He whispered something to his blonde friend, hoping that he would understand him, and it seemed like it could work out. Dandelion's expression expressed understanding and surprise. The hero, gathering his will into a fist, decided that in order to stop Lencia, he would have to go ahead, regardless of the risk. The guy activated a level 43 chaos spell. Lencia looked straight ahead with incomprehension at the hero's attempts to do something. Now the opponent looked around himself, searching for his duelist with his eyes. Lime tried to catch him off guard, running closer and closer. The blow promised to be powerful, based on the speed and fury with which the protagonist ran. And so the real battle began, in which both could be equal in strength. But then Lencia indicated that he was sorry, but his core was still first class. Then Lime wanted to use acceleration, realizing that the enemy was physically agile. But it was too late. The ground beneath the guy's feet seemed to disappear for a moment, and his legs themselves stopped obeying him. Lencia thrust his rod in with immeasurable fury, screaming for the hero to die already. But the protagonist also wished this for his rival, his eyes glowing purple with his emotions. Playing the fool with Lime, Lencia laughed out loud and said that all his manipulations were useless. The rod nevertheless pierced the protagonist, causing him to growl furiously. And he fell to the ground lifeless, scarlet blood oozing from a fresh wound. The observing judge delivered a verdict that the boy showed no signs of life. With a sense of dignity, Lencia said that Lime was dead. Everything was over. The judge pointed to him and explained that Commander-in-Chief Lencia had won. He began his triumphant speech by saying that everyone had seen with their own eyes that justice always prevails. He carefully scanned the rows of stands with his eyes. He stopped at the judge, an aristocratic girl with her companion, who looked at him with apprehension. Lenzia looked at them questioningly for a while. He didn't see what was happening behind him. The main character seemed to have risen from the dead. He turned around, hearing movement, and started screaming when he saw Lime alive. He said it was impossible because his breathing had stopped. Blood was now oozing not only from the hero's wound, but also from his mouth. He was trying to stretch out his hand straight towards the commander-in-chief. He looked at the guy with disdain and a sidelong glance, not understanding what was happening. Lenzia suddenly felt someone else's presence nearby. He started screaming when he realized it wasn't just a feeling. It was actually happening. They could touch him. Later he realized that these were elves, whom he himself had enslaved. He screamed, begged them to let him go. He was incredibly scared. With a bloody face, Lime found himself right next to the commander-in-chief, speaking in a terrible voice directly to him so that he would go to hell with him. He continued to scream and deny in horror. He had never been so scared. Suddenly the hands and everything around began to disappear. No one could be heard anymore. Now Lenzia sat alone on the ground, wiping his face, with no one around. Only Lime, but not at all beaten, and without a drop of blood on himself. He thought that this could have been the whole vision. The protagonist asked his opponent what the winner's dream was like, and he used level 65 vision. Lenzia only remembered that guy's look from the past, full of determination and anger. It happened then. He began to feel himself, the place where his magic item should be. But then suddenly, Dandelion shouted. He informed Lime that everything was ready. The girls, including the fairy, were also already standing ready to do their part of the work. Lenzia was perplexed as to how the hero had noticed his trick. Lime looked at him with contempt. He said that he realized almost immediately that all this was not his ability. It was a statue made of orichalcum, which contains all the techniques. With the help of this brooch, he could use them at any time. All his taunts came to mind, but in reality the commander-in-chief was not at all fast. He simply used ready-made things over and over again, and essentially did nothing himself, and could not do anything. Now he doesn't have any of this. We can see how he will behave in this situation. The guys with all their efforts sealed the statue. Now Lenzia didn't look arrogant, but rather the opposite. He himself felt weak. Orichalcum also destroyed Lime's physical abilities, and now everything is broken. Lime was now much stronger than his opponent, and was ready to fight him. He said out loud that it was his turn now, asking if he was ready. But Lenzia, looking at the main character with fear, asked him to stop, because the results were already final. With his last phrase about him winning, Lime's fist was already flying straight at his opponent. The blow landed on the commander-in-chief's torso, and he flew up on the spot from the force of Lamb. Lenzia was knocked over. He became afraid both from the upcoming pain and from shame in front of the audience. The next blow didn't take long to arrive. This time it was landed on his jaw by the same fist. The enemy flew to the ground with great speed, backwards, with his arms outstretched in front of him. The hero's hands had already begun to accumulate new energy, unwilling to stop, wanting to avenge the atrocities. The eyes glowed with different colors, which meant that several forces were combined within him. With the thought of finally defeating Lenzia, he wanted to deal a crushing blow. The impact was accompanied by a surge of energy that obscured visibility. The commander-in-chief sat, pressed against the wall, now unconscious. The verdict was that the Goblin Lime had won. Letty entered the arena as soon as the main character called her here. She stood next to Lenzia and said that she ordered, according to the oath given, to tell the location of the Elven Emperor Evil. Against his will, words came out of his character's mouth that he was in the basement of the castle. There was a wall there that was a hidden door. He couldn't finish everything, and it was clear from then on, Letty's anger knew no bounds. She clenched her teeth, not knowing what she could do to him now. A group of comrades were about to go in the direction of Lenzius's words, but the guards stopped them, saying that they would not let them through. The girl was already at the limit of her emotions. A tear was already running down her cheek from her anger. Suddenly, a blow landed on the back of the head of one of the guards. Judging by the sounds, this blow was not a weak one. This is Elrond. He came to the aid of his princess. She thanked him and was very glad to see him, but still corrected him. She was a knight. The man looked at the girl as if with fatherly love and tenderness. The hero interrupted their conversation, saying that it was time to start implementing the plan. He flew high into the air. I tried to speak as loudly as possible, as the information had to reach everyone. He informed that Ricci was no longer there, and Lenzia. The elves looked and listened to him with smiles. The man stood guard, ensuring safety from those who were loyal to these traitors. The protagonist continued that this was the result of the elves fighting for victory. They were ready to go further. He called upon the elves who were ready to go with him to go forward. The crowd erupted in shouts and delight, and bright voices and laughter could be heard from everywhere. The hero set off on his intended path. Buttercup called out to him. He wanted to add something. These were simple words, a request that he rely on him. Lute told him to go after Letty. Lime replied that he understood everything. He trusted his friend. Letty was now standing in the dungeon, in a hidden room, in front of strange illuminated magical symbols. She recited the spell in an ancient language, crying from tension and fear. Suddenly the wall in front of her disappeared. Apparently everything turned out as it should have. She was surprised that everything happened so quickly. She couldn't wait any longer. She ran from the spot and called out to her father as she went, with a trembling voice. He had been lying in the same position, imprisoned, for several years. Seeing that her father was chained with a high-class chain, the girl cursed. She wanted to rip this thing off. But no matter how hard I tried, I only harmed myself. Then Lime came up behind her silently and said that he could try. He had a destroyer sword with him, which had great power and could help in this situation. The hero began to swing it, showing off his skill. The chains were instantly broken by this maneuver. Letty's father's eyes opened slightly, and he muttered something unintelligible out loud, not understanding where he was or what was happening. The first thing the girl did was rush to hug her loved one. Her father affectionately called her Tiara Letty. The main character joyfully watched this heartwarming picture. And so peace came to the land of the elves. Even the weather became clear and warm. After these events, all enemies began to be detained, and the slaves were immediately freed. After the goblins, it was possible to help this country, and then only a bright future awaited the heroes. The hero was ready to go to the army of the Demon King himself. People gathered in the land of the elves, the Emperor's hall. The king thanked the protagonist for saving their country. The guy was, of course, very grateful, but replied that it was not only his merit. He said that there were other guys participating with him, and Letty was there too. There was also a friend of Buttercup and a goblin fairy. The Emperor asked him not to be modest, because everything has its limits, and if he overdoes it, it can become unpleasant. The hero tried to say that he didn't want to, but he couldn't finish his thought. Elrond asked to be allowed to thank Lime and, without waiting for an answer, said, "Thank you." He grabbed the bridge of his nose. Remembering the moments he had experienced, he said, "It's good that it happened without Lencia stealing her." The man then asked the Emperor what he thought about giving the princess to the hero. He thought for a moment and replied that while there were no other species in the country, the first mixing would be with goblins. He smiled at the thought of what the child would be like. Both of the culprits of this conversation blushed with embarrassment. The girl asked what they were talking about. Then the father asked his daughter if she was against it, to which she only looked towards the guy without answering. Elrond was also pleased with this outcome. Seeing the princess's reaction, he said that everything was decided. Not fully realizing what was happening, the girl thought that they hadn't even held hands. But suddenly the whole joyful atmosphere was interrupted by the main character. He asked everyone to wait. He said that he understood everything, but now was not the time. He went on to explain that his movements were most likely noticed by the Demon King. He thought that he was attacking, so he needed to act as quickly as possible. The Emperor said that the boy was right in his judgments and asked what he would do. The hero was going to enter his army very carefully. Elrond and the Emperor never expected such an answer from Lime. Buttercup and the fairy simply sighed, but they understood that nothing could be done about it. Letty looked at the guy excitedly and mentally said his name. The hero asked not to worry, and claimed that everything would go smoothly. This country had cut off contact with the Demon King, and it would be impossible to maintain neutrality. The Emperor spoke, especially with the strength of the guy. Everything should be fine. He raised his hand and called Elrond to him. He pointed to magical items made of orichalcum and suggested using them. The guy held his breath as soon as he saw them. A flying fairy nearby offered to squeeze the most out of them. The Emperor continued, saying that they were always ready to help him. The hero bowed and thanked Letty's father. Now the main character proudly bore the title of savior of the country of elves. Finally, the Emperor wished Lime good luck. But nevertheless, he wanted to at least note it. And of course it happened, because the ruler wanted it. A girl approached the boys who were talking to each other. Lime stared at her involuntarily. It was the Emperor's daughter, Letty, looking graceful that evening. The main character couldn't take his eyes off her. A little fairy was sitting on his shoulder and was also admiring the girl. The princess looked straight into the guy's eyes, blushing a little from embarrassment and such a direct gaze. Then a grand buffet was organized, and Liutik ate everything with gusto. Lime was doing the same. Letty was just watching. The hero began to talk to the other elves. They thanked him for saving the country, but he asked them not to treat him like that. Girls clung to Buttercup, insisting that from that moment on, they were his fans. The arrivals were also simply delighted with the Goblin Fairy, who spoke with everyone with interest. Everyone danced joyfully around, celebrating this beautiful day of rebirth. A little later, the main character went out onto the balcony to breathe some fresh air and think about his own things. Dandelion approached him completely silently and asked if he could be in such a place, to which the guy replied that goblins were not used to the stage. Lute said the same thing, saying that they were similar to him. And here he was active, but Lime said that not really. Lute continued that the main character really isn't boring. He showed the boy a world he couldn't even imagine, so he would like to fight alongside him from now on. Lime didn't expect to hear this at all, so he was very surprised. Dandelion said that for this he wanted to become stronger and asked the hero to tell him about his path. Lime happily agreed. Liut was very happy. The hero understood that Dandelion Arcadia had abilities superior to his own. He was stronger only because he had been reborn. However, this path was not easy. Lime extended his fist towards Liut, asking if he could catch up. The blonde answered without a doubt that he could handle it. He was ready, so he returned the same gesture to his friend and ally. The girls watched their conversation. The fairy said that the boys were doing well after all. The protagonist returned to his room after the celebration ended. Here the goblin fairy lay down, saying that it was of course fun, but she was so tired, the guy agreed with her. But after thinking about it, the fairy asked him what he was doing. The guy replied that it was nothing special, he just decided to put his thoughts in order. He peered at the world map, and the fairy was also interested. He replied that he was going to think of a plan to infiltrate the Demon King's castle. He mused that the Demon Continent was divided between the 7 best generals of the Demon King's army. So far, everything has been going according to the game's plot. They have already liberated the lands of Dial and Ricci. I needed to get to the castle and kill the Demon King. But there was still something else that needed to be done. It was necessary to pass through the lands of the dark soothsayer Valenci. You also need to go through the lands of the demonic general Shaynel. But the Demon King already knows who the main character is, and they won't be able to do everything without drawing too much attention. The fairy listened to all this, and replied that there would be several inspection points on the way to the castle. There are also dragons at every step. They can kill as soon as they spot you. The fairy continued, saying that it would be impossible to move on the ground, and even less so by air. They had no chance of getting there. But the hero said that there were other options, because he knew this game by heart. He pointed to the map and said that there was a mountain range here that was impossible to get around, but few people knew what was inside. This is the dark crystals leading to the other side. It will take them straight to the castle. This is the only way to get there. The fairy was interested in how he knew all this. It was the first time she had heard about the dark crystal mine. The guy replied that it was a long story, but in the game it was the only way to get to the castle. Crouching in the air, the little fairy reassured herself that she could already get used to all his surprises. The hero didn't respond to this, but simply suggested thinking about the plan carefully. He thought, inside the mine there are several low-level monsters that work there, but there is a time in which they change each other. The fairy also considered this question with interest. Tired of all these thoughts, Lime decided that the route for today was enough. He could figure out the plan tomorrow. The fairy was glad that the work was finished for now, and she could finally sleep. The guy lay down on his bed, and his thoughts were still full. Even though they had decided on the route, now he needed a plan of attack. But he tried to push all thoughts aside. He wanted to think about this tomorrow. It was already deep night outside. The main character fell asleep quickly after a busy day. The fairy also fell asleep instantly, snoring quietly in her small bed. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, a magical silhouette appeared, accompanied by a blue glow. But the hero didn't react to this in any way. He slept soundly. Bands of energy formed around the silhouette, so strong that they could be seen from the window outside. The next day, everything was already quiet. The hero couldn't wake up. He wanted to sleep at least a little longer. Opening his eyes, he cursed, feeling someone next to him in bed. He quickly threw the blanket off the bed. It was some girl quietly snoring. Out of surprise and fear, Lime jumped out of bed straight to the wall. The girl tried to wake up, rubbing her sleepy eyes, looking questioningly at the hero. The guy asked who she was and what she was doing in his bed. The fairy woke up from Lime's screams and said that she understood that he was a hero and all that. But why scream like that? She continued, saying that he couldn't do whatever he wanted, to which the guy replied that it wasn't on purpose. An unfamiliar girl with horns pointed at the hero and said that she had come to praise him for defeating Lencia. Lime thanked him, but repeated his question. The girl apologized when she realized that the guy had never seen her like this before. She slowly, syllable by syllable, said that she was the one who brought him back to this world. The main character was surprised, not believing that this was true. He realized that this was the goblin goddess, and took his head in his hand. She was completely different. Then the goddess asked him again about his dirty thoughts. The guy swore that it was not so. The goblin fairy addressed the goddess, calling her mistress, and asked how she was able to get here. Then the goddess asked in response whether it was necessary, since she had finally regained her ability to appear in this world, and all thanks to Lime. But the hero couldn't calm down as to why she had gone to bed with him. To which she replied that she had appeared so effectively, but Lime had missed everything in his sleep. I wanted to repeat everything again, but she simply decided to tell how it was. Then she materialized above his bed, but even this couldn't interfere with the guy's sleep. The goddess wanted the guy to wake up and see her, so she decided to take action. But no matter how much she tried, pushed him, or talked to him, there was still no reaction. After this, she herself became tired. The bed was nearby, but she didn't remember what happened next. And in general, I wanted to close this topic, clearing my throat. After all, she didn't come here just like that. She came to Lime, the goblin hero. She wanted to lend him her power to fight the Demon King. But the guy, naturally, didn't expect this. But at first she asked for only one thing, to let her sleep a little longer. The protagonist bowed to the emperor and once again thanked him for his hospitality. The emperor responded in kind, asking him thoughtfully if he was really leaving already. Elrond explained this behavior by the fact that His Majesty had overindulged in alcohol the previous day. The Emperor continued to stutter, saying that if Lime suddenly needed help, he should let him know. He also said that they would do everything in their power, and the main character thanked His Highness, and he immediately asked if he could provide one favor. The Emperor answered without hesitation that he could ask for whatever he wished. Then the guy took hold of the rolled-up map that he had with him. He pointed to a place on the map, and replied that he really needed him to give them permission to enter that area of their property. At this time, the man saw and heard everything. He was surprised, because he knew what kind of place it was. A place where even the imperial family is forbidden to enter. A forbidden place. The Emperor didn't even ask how he knew about this place. It had been more than 5 centuries since his sealing, but Lime was sure he needed to go there. After this confirmation from the protagonist, the Emperor replied that he would give them this permission. However, Elrond began to object. This place was too dangerous. Without the Dark Elf's accompaniment, everything could end, so someone replied that he would go with them. It was the Emperor's daughter Letty. She said she would be their guide. Elrond was surprised that the princess was willing to do such a thing, but the Emperor immediately realized that there was no point in stopping her. That's why my father agreed to this adventure. He only told Tiara to protect Mr. Lime and his team. The girl sincerely thanked her father with a joyful look, addressing him formally in front of everyone. She promised that she would try very hard. It was even more joyful that she would be going on the journey with Lime. Lime responded by saying that he would also try hard. Buttercup stood to the side and watched them. The fairy also flew up to look at this situation. The whole team was assembled. Now it was time for them to hit the road. They all turned around and walked confidently in search of adventure. Elrond's gaze caught on a girl he had never seen before. For the goblin goddess, she was sleepy again, so she yawned. The man thought that she also came with Mr. Lime. On the far border of the Dark Elf Empire, there is an ancient forest. There are wild lands there where no sunlight falls. For 5 centuries, this place has been considered a forbidden zone, causing terror. It is also teeming with evil monsters. According to the game's plot, a treasure of the highest rarity is hidden here, something without which we will not be able to defeat the Demon King and his army. One of the comrades was holding a map in his hands. He was looking at the place where he and his team were now heading. Letty was now the guide of her group and directed everyone. The guys obediently followed her. Throughout this entire journey, the goblin goddess was unable to shake off her drowsiness. Lime asked her if she was really sure she wanted to go with them. She looked at him with confusion. She replied, standing up in a calm pose, that she had gone through so much to be here again. Of course she was sure. After this, the main character said that he had long wanted to ask what exactly he was talking about. Then she began her story. In order to come down here, she needed the worship and faith of their worshippers. The protagonist's achievements also played a huge role. The guy remembered something. The game had special counters of religious influence. The higher the faith in the deity, the easier it was to receive his blessing. Since the goddess herself descended to them, does this mean that our world is in a completely deplorable state? So far, of course, everything is not so bad. But still, the Demon King, who rules over all monsters, had to protect his subjects. In fact, he recklessly kills his fellow creatures, including goblins. The goddess explained that at this rate, the monsters would drive themselves to extinction, without ever seeing the final battle with humans. But the king was not always like this, the goddess said. She does not know what caused such cruelty. Everything became clear to Lime. He believed that he was the only one who could change everything. The hero decided to ask what the boys should call the goddess. What should she call her? Then she replied that since she was the goddess of goblins, she should be called Lady Boggob. She repeated it again and asked him to call her that. The guy opened his mouth in horror. When he said that it was so terrible, the goddess's horns began to move with anger. She immediately jumped on the hero and shouted at him, asking if he had forgotten who he was talking to. Then Lime replied that he understood everything and asked for forgiveness. Letty watched this massacre and saw another competitor in the goddess. She didn't take her eyes off Lime until the argument between the two stopped. Soon they came to the Forbidden Forest, the Great Elven Forest. Everyone, including the Emperor's daughter, stood looking at him in amazement. The team also noticed scary monsters. They did not understand why they crawled out so suddenly. The monsters, naturally, did not answer their question, but only came closer, wanting to examine the travelers. The guy asked the goddess if something similar had happened to them. What was she talking about? And she offendedly asked him to call her Lady Boggob. Then Lime decided to turn to his friend. He called Layut, who replied that he was already waiting for orders. The whole group of comrades gathered in the forest and discussed what they would do from the beginning. The main character suggested getting rid of the inhospitable hosts. The monsters didn't wait long for the boys to figure out their plan. The biggest ones ran towards them, screaming and with their mouths open. But the guys weren't the timid kind. They managed to jump back from their attacks and looked at their backs. Lime, in one of these attacks, jumped high above the monster, landed on his soft fur, stopped at it for a moment, applying dark mania, sinister analysis. As he thought, the energy enveloping this forest drives the animals into a frenzy. It was Dandelion's turn. Lime shouted his name so that he could react. Loot shouted back that it was time to moderate their ardor. While striking one of the enraged animals, the guy tried to use maximum force. Loot also kept up with Lime, concentrating on his magic. Noticing each other's successes, they did not forget to mention it. They were shaking themselves off after the battle. Next to them lay a pile of defeated monsters. Letty was surprised how they managed it so quickly. The goddess was calm. She claimed that it was all because of her patronage. Having completed the first test, they all went further, deeper into the forest. Letty said that this forbidden place was sealed 5 centuries ago. No one knows what might await them here. According to the legends, if you get lost here, you will never be able to get out again. Loot noticed that as if they had seen this before, the fairy noted that they had already passed here. The goddess, still yawning, explained that these tales speak of the labyrinth effect. Because of this darkness, it is impossible to see the path even from above. The blonde was upset for a second, worried that they would never get out of here. The fairy flew up to the goddess, asking if she couldn't help them in any way, to which she thought that they should figure it out on their own. But Letty was there, and she said that there was nothing wrong with it, so she went with them. She held out a glowing object, saying it was time to use the artifact her father had given her. Lime was surprised. He recognized it, the guiding pendulum. The princess confirmed the protagonist's words. The artifact was made from the ancient orichalcum crystal. She was about to start talking about him further, but stopped. She didn't understand how the guy knew about it. Fearing that he had said too much, the guy replied that he had just overheard it. But the girl didn't want to believe him. She called him a weirdo and meant it. But she dropped this topic, continuing her story. This pendulum knows about every corner of the demonic continent. It will show you the way. Letty raised her hand with the artifact above her and cast a spell in Elvish. It began to reflect green light, indicating where the group needed to go. Letty was pleased with his work and encouraged her friends to go ahead. Although the path was not easy, it went through trees, bushes, and thorny branches. Also along the way, there were still monsters that Lime easily took out. Dandelion also made every effort to ensure that the animals did not touch his team. The goblin goddess was reluctant to offer her help to the boys. She was quietly snoring, sitting near a tree. Lime lifted her onto his back and was going to carry her like that for the next part of the journey. Letty suddenly noticed something and asked everyone else to pay attention to it. This was the way out. They finally found it. Coming out of this terrible place, they saw a huge crater. It was right in the middle of the forest, as if someone had made it on purpose. Buttercup was very surprised by this picture and stood in a stupor for several minutes. On this crater, there stood a well-kept house, surrounded by a fence. The little fairy noticed that someone was living there. Lime confirmed this, saying that this was where they were heading. Here, in the deepest part of the forest, lives the great elder of the Dark Elves, one of the wisest and most powerful on this continent. He was a treasure of the highest rarity. Lime was already standing in front of the door to his house. He thought for a moment and then knocked quietly. A male voice was heard behind the hero, saying that he no longer remembered how many centuries ago he last had guests. The guy immediately turned around, but there was no one nearby. He didn't even feel their presence. He had already thought that it was all an illusion, but the voice was heard again. It said that it was rude of him, because he was right here. Having already seen this man, he looked a little from behind his back. He turned away completely, but this time there was no one there either. How was that possible? This stranger suddenly appeared right on the main character's head. He quickly jumped down from his comfortable spot and asked the guy what brought him here. Lime thought that he was so small, and you couldn't tell from his aura. He said out loud that he came to meet him, the elder. He said that he wanted to save this world. After these words, the old man's eyes widened, as if he understood something. The guy, understanding his surprise, explained that he wanted to challenge the Demon King, the greatest of the Dark Elf elders, who lives in the heart of the Lost Forest. Principier Luelf is this old man now. He is the founder of the Empire, and the creator of the technique of using orichalcum. Also the great-grandfather of Emperor Luelf, Letty's father, and the great elder, who possesses all the wisdom of the demonic continent. At least that's how it should be. But now all the guys were in this modest, lonely house. They stood and looked down at the elder, expecting some kind of instructions from him. He sat on his stool and asked why they were looking at him like that. The protagonist recalled that the great sage from the game looked a little different. Because of this, he decided to ask if that great sage was really the principal. The old man answered that he was the one, and asked if there were any questions. The hero smiled and claimed that he was simply described a little differently, but he thought to himself that maybe this was another consequence of the mutation. The old man thought for a moment and chuckled. Then he pointed his finger at Letty, asking if she had brought the elven wine. She immediately took it out, saying that she took it for cooking, in case they set up camp, or for disinfection if someone got hurt. The goddess watched this together with the fairy, hearing voices saying that it was already possible to open it, offering to have a little drink. The old man was very happy. He said that he had lived for many centuries without this delight. He drank the wine and said, "These brewers are a bunch of idiots, but their wine is something special." Letty confirmed this, because this is wine for the royal family. The guys were talking among themselves to see if he was really the one they were looking for. The empty bottle was already lying on the table, with only the remains of wine dripping out of it. Lime decided to ask the great sage now. He had a request for them. He seriously asked to teach them how to control the darkness. The old man turned around at the boy's voice and asked again if it was really darkness. The main character already had enough of it, but the guy explained that it wasn't about the quantity, they needed more. They needed to master a secret technique, a physical charge of darkness. The old man angrily asked who told him about her. Physical darkness charge is an incredibly rare skill that allows one to increase the level of darkness in the body, which only a great sage possesses. If the protagonist had such a skill, he would have been able to avoid exhaustion, as happened during the fight with Dial. The hero knew that no matter how many spells and potions he used, nothing would make him stronger than increasing his level of control over the darkness. In just a couple of weeks, the Demon King will take action, wanting to reclaim the lands of Diola and Ricci. The guy understood that he had to stop him, and to do this, he needed a secret technique. The old man only thanked him for the wine, but could not help in any way, even though Lime begged him. The sage told him not to try to jump above his head. He decided to never take on students again. He didn't say anything else. He just said that it was time for the guys to go. Lime also didn't know what to say to this. He stood silently, thinking about his actions. He decided to ask. It was all because his former student, the Demon King, betrayed him. From these words, the sage seemed to become even more angry. How could this guy know such a thing? Then the hero began to tell the story of how a sage was once a teacher of a young man. And then he decided to give his secret knowledge to his student. The huge crater in the middle of which his house sits is a reminder of the day he tried to stop the Demon King. The old man could not believe that he knew all this. There was just an episode in the game that told this story, but he replied that it didn't matter. Right now, the Demon King is undergoing an unknown transformation, and his disciple intends to drown the entire continent in blood. Therefore, taking into account everything that was said, the hero once again decided to ask for help to stop him. He asked to teach him the skill. The sage thought about it for a while, without taking his eyes off the guy. In his eyes, he recognized other, seemingly long-forgotten eyes of his former student. He spoke in his own words, and he also asked him to teach him his craft. The old man also thought about the fact that he was again interfering in the affairs of fate, and that is why the sage abandoned this idea. But he continued his thought. He would have said so if the goblin had not interested him. Letty had already begun to rejoice and praise the great sage. But the elder said that first it was necessary to make sure that the hero had everything he needed, and said to meet outside. The main character replied that this was all he wanted. Now the two of them are standing opposite each other, each with his own weapon in his hand. The girls watched the upcoming fight with concern, but the goddess seemed completely unconcerned. Dandelion commanded the duelists to go to their places, acting as a judge. Lime understood that if he couldn't prove himself now, then all his efforts could be considered a waste of time. He was going to act quickly. He quickly jumped into the air, preparing to strike. His gaze indicated tenacity, strength, and the desire to win. Suddenly, the sage's eyes lit up in front of him, blinding him. Having already swung, the hero noticed that the old man had disappeared. He was already irritated by these games of hide-and-seek. He wanted to find him as soon as possible. A wave of powerful energy was rushing towards him at high speed. The guy barely had time to react. He was a little hurt this time. The great sage wondered how he managed to dodge, while the protagonist understood that he could hardly track it. Then the old man said what Lime would do with this next, and began to disappear before our eyes, dissolving into thin air. The hero tensed up. He realized that this was a complete disguise. Nothing could be done until he found a way to see it. After thinking over his plan quickly, he realized that it would only work once, but it would be worth it. In the middle of their fight, a loud sound was heard, and it seemed as if the earth was flying apart. This hero used dark magic, a level 99th wave. It turned out to be something like a column of a caustic purple color. The guy didn't intend to look for the sage's body. He wanted to find his magic. As if wearing special glasses, he saw the silhouette of its powerful energy. The hero hit there with all his might, but the great sage managed to disappear faster again. He whispered right in his ear that Lime was so naive. He was a little frightened by the surprise, not understanding how he should act next. The old man, swinging at him with a scream, wanted to end this as quickly as possible, having lost his former hope. But suddenly the hero, just like the old man, disappeared before his eyes. He wondered in his mind if he had really decided to fool him. Dandelion realized that Lime had used the same technique at the tournament. Pictures of that duel were drawn in his head, and Dandelion was very surprised by this. At this moment, the protagonist approached the great sage and decided to deliver the decisive blow now. But the old man was not so naive. He managed to notice this. He managed to intercept the hero's weapon with just 2 fingers, without injuring himself in any way. Lime was taken aback by this. He thought that victory was in his pocket. It seemed as if the sage did not have to exert any effort at all when he launched the magic sword upward. It sank into the dry ground with a dull ringing sound. The guy was upset by this. Now he was disarmed. The old man said that this was his technique. He didn't disappear anywhere. Rather, he used it as bait. For an ordinary goblin, even if it was only for a moment, he was surprised. Lime couldn't figure out what he was getting at. Then the sage struck the ground with his staff and said that it was very good. He was ready to teach him. Classes were supposed to start tomorrow, and the hero couldn't get over this news. As he left, the old man turned around to clarify that they would meet here early in the morning. The protagonist quickly bowed several times, chattering words of gratitude. The whole team praised Lime and shouted that they knew he would succeed. The goddess, as always, was indifferent. On the first day of training, the sage sat on the boy's feet, counting his exercises. The hero stood on one hand. The count was already 992. Or rather, he was on one of his fingers, with just a little bit left to reach 1,000. Lime cried out with relief at this long-awaited figure. He collapsed to the ground, trying to catch his breath. The old man decided to tell the goblin that everything in this world was created from 6 elements, such as fire, water, earth, wind, light, and darkness. His technique is based on a special breathing technique that awakens the darkness in the body and significantly increases its strength. To achieve this, one would have to go through all the basic teachings about the mind and body, and the hero agreed to everything. Now the two friends performed this exercise together. The sage asked Liut if he was a kobold. This meant that controlling darkness was much easier for him, and so the decision was made to intensify his training. That is, another 10,000 push-ups. This number made Liutik's eyes dart around. Lime found this training terribly grueling, but he was willing to endure it all and master this special skill.